Perfect. All right. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Just once again, if you didn't hear before, if you could please type your name and affiliation or where you're coming in into the chat box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. That way we can document how many people attended our AGM and just say hi. We'll also ask that everyone remains muted for the entire AGM unless you have a question, and then you can put your question into the chat box, and if we need more clarification, then you can unmute yourself and we'll ask you to provide more clarification. Danny Smart, the interim field operations manager, is going to be monitoring the chat box. So when you have a question, put it in there and she'll let us know at the appropriate time to bring that question forward. I'm going to now just pass it off to our chair, Randy Harris, to welcome you to the AGM and kick off our meeting. Randy.
Yes, hi. Just good timing there. The phone rang just as I was ready to speak. I'd like to thank you all for attending the EKISC, the 2021 EKISC annual general meeting. I'm Randy Harris. I'm the chair for this year, and the chair of the board. And I'd like to acknowledge that EKISC works and operates on the traditional territories of the Ktunaxa and Secwepemc peoples who have been in this region for thousands of years, stewarding the land. I'd also take this chance as we start off to thank the EKISC staff for putting all the items on the agenda together and all the reports that you're about to hear. Especially like to reach out to Emma DeGroot for doing all the running about, talking to contributors, putting the PowerPoint together, setting up the Zoom call, and all the new features we're going to see, like interventions. I'd like to thank Katie for actually stepping up and acting as program director for the past 2 months while we've been going through a process of change. I was about to announce who our new program director is, but I've been informed we haven't actually voted on it yet, so I can't do that. So Katie, could you take it from there?
Definitely. Thanks, Randy. Yeah, once again, if there's any comments or questions, just please add them to the chat box, and Danny will bring them forward to us at the right time.
Okay.
One more time, just please remain muted.
Okay.
And yeah, we're just going to go over a few housekeeping items.
Yes.
Yeah, and go over the agenda here. Okay, here's our agenda for this morning and part of the afternoon. We have a lot to go through today, so hopefully everything goes seamlessly. We're going to start with a quick introduction about EKISC as our organization, as well as go over our staff and board. And then we'll move on to just a few highlights of our 2020 season, as this is a AGM for our 2020 season. We typically have our AGM in the early spring while 2020 is fresh in our mind, but we deferred things due to COVID in hopes that we would have an in-person AGM this fall. But unfortunately, we are still here in this virtual world. We will then move on and provide some highlights from our 2020 season that we're really excited about, and continuing on with projects. After that, we will hear from some of our partners and fellow land managers in the East Kootenay to provide updates on behalf of their organizations. We'll be hearing from Joe Strong with NTBC, Todd Larson with Flinrod, Mark Trudeau with the Rocky Mountain Trench Society, and Gabriella with EKISC is going to provide an update on behalf of BC Parks, as they are still busy in the field and were unable to join us today. After that, we'll have a quick 5 to 10 minute break, and then we'll be moving on to our first two keynote speakers, starting with Jane Mangold and then moving to Catherine Tarasoff. We'll break for lunch after that for 30 minutes. And then when we return, we're going to commence with the very exciting AGM business meeting, followed up with our third keynote speaker, Myra Jukers. After that, we go one more quick 10-minute break. And then when we return, we're going to commence our speedy sessions. We have 3 speedy sessions today. One again with Mark Trudeau, the Rocky Mountain Trench, as well as Jamie Davies with the Regional District of East Kootenay, and Megan Evans with the Alberta Invasive Species Council, all highlighting particular projects or programs that are that they are involved with that manages invasive species. The speedy sessions are designed to be more informal and more of a discussion, and we encourage everyone to ask questions in the chat box, or once they're done presentations, we'll open it up to be more of a discussion and a Q&A period about their programs. Then we will move on to the recipient of our 2020 Golden Shovel Award. This is an award, an annual award that recognizes an organization or an individual that has made a significant contribution to the invasive plant management in the region. We have someone really special joining us today, so I'm pretty excited about this award. All right, here is our EKISC staff. We currently operate as a team of 4. We have 2 full-time and 2 part-time employees over the winter. Typically, we have 2 or 3 summer students helping out with the field operations and the education and communication side of things throughout the summer. There's myself, Katie Reed in the top left, the intern program director, as well as Danny Smart, the intern field operations manager. Danny started with us in 2017 as a field technician, and she moved up in 2018 to be the field operations coordinator, and now currently the intern field operations manager. She's there with her awesome field dog, Walter. In the bottom left, we have Gabriella Halas. She started with us in 2020, stepping into the field operations manager position during my mat leave. And then she stayed on with us as a program assistant throughout 2021. And her awesome field dog as well, Cedar, is in that photo. And Emma DeGroot started with us last year as a field assistant, and then liked it so much she came back as the crew lead this summer. And we've managed to keep her on as a communication assistant. So she's just taken over a little bit of everything. Yeah, it's been really, really good. EKISC has also seen a bit of a turnover. This last year, we had Kendall Benesh, our former program director, leave in May of 2020, and we wish her well in her new endeavors and miss her lots. Hillary Baker came on in May and was with EKISC throughout the summer, and she left at the end of September. Bailey Rep, our education and communication coordinator, was with us for a couple years, and she moved on in September as well to a position with WildSite, a similar education and communication position, and we wish her all the best as well. We had 2 summer students this summer, one with the education assistant and the other one in the field operations assistant, Jess Duncan and Chris Martin, who were in school in the Vancouver and Vancouver Island, and decided to take the opportunity to come check out the East Kootenays for a summer, which I think is pretty cool. I think they had a really great summer exploring, hiking, checking out the East Kootenays, and now they're back in Vancouver, continuing on with their environmental careers. And here's our current board of directors. We have Randy Harris in the chair position. He's an independent contractor, as well as Shauna Larad, the vice chair from Flinrord, Stephanie Daniels with the Ministry of Transportation as our treasurer, and Raylan Bloomhagen as the secretary from the Waldo Stockbreeders Livestock Association. And then we have 4 directors: Jamie Davies with the RDEK, Rick Teagart with the Windermere and District Farmers Institute, Dave Pick, he's a director at large, and Rick Van Horn with the BC Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. All right, just a quick overview about EKISC as an organization. EKISC works to coordinate invasive species management in the East Kootenays. We're one of the many regional invasive species organizations in the province that works closely with ministries to coordinate, administer invasive plant treatments on public lands and coordinate awareness and outreach activities. As such, we are not a land manager. We work with land managers to facilitate a coordinated approach to invasive species management and to foster increased support for invasive species management throughout the region. We primarily do work on public lands. We are also the main delivery agency for invasive species education and outreach, and administer training and outreach opportunities to many different stakeholders and groups in the region. And of course, I would also like to mention our sponsors for the AGM. We are incredibly lucky to partner with many organizations in the region. The Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development, as well as the Columbia Basin Trust, both provide funding for coordination, awareness, and outreach activities, which makes this event possible. Tech has also generously sponsored this event, and here are just some of the funders that we work with throughout the years. All right, now I'm going to pass it off to Gabriella to do a brief overview about our 2020 highlights. Gabriella.
Great, thanks, Katie. Yeah, so as most of you know, in 2020 with Katie on mat leave, I was the interim field operations manager. Despite a steep learning curve last year, I had a lot of support from Kendall, Danny, as well as Katie, and it was, as usual, a very busy season. Next slide. With 20 funders supporting EKISC and a gross revenue of almost $1 million, the bulk of our work came from invasive plant management programming in the form of fee-for-service work. Wort and the Ministry of Transportation, MOTI, were our main funders. Program planning and administration, education and outreach, and aquatic invasive species monitoring formed the rest of our annual work. Next slide. In 2020, we had a total of 9 contractors, including our main area controllers and rancher sprayers. Our in-house crew conducted a lot of inventories, mechanical treatments, and invasive aquatic sampling. In 2020, we also established a number of long-term effectiveness monitoring plots at some of our project locations. We continue to work with the Grassland Rangeland Enhancement Program, or GREP, to facilitate rancher sprayer treatments on Crown land range tenures, as well as working on invasive species management planning and implementation for First Nations and conservation organizations. Special projects were begun, including a 5-year multi-stakeholder project in the Elk Valley and another project for the Wycliffe Conservation Complex. Danny will speak to those in our 2021 highlights. Next slide. In 2020, a total of 2,975 sites were surveyed, which included inventories and surveyed and then treated plant sites. Of that amount of sites, 2,920 were chemical treatment sites and 55 were mechanical pulls. Of these sites, 856 hectares were treated with herbicide and 0.7 hectares were mechanical treatments. Invasive plant inventories totaled 1,944 hectares, so we covered a lot of ground last year. The most common plants for chemical treatment were spotted knapweed, yellow hawkweed, St. John's wort, and blueweed. Mechanical pulls were mostly spotted knapweed, perennial pepperweed, which is also a provincial early detection rapid response species, and wild parsnip. We also monitored 13% of all treated sites, slightly higher than the 10% required monitoring amount. Next slide. For our aquatic invasive program, we surveyed 15 water bodies and collected 149 samples. Testing was done using plankton tow nets, and the samples were sent along with other data to a lab in Vancouver. Some lakes were sampled monthly, with higher risk ones tested bi-monthly. Luckily, none of the sampled water bodies showed evidence of zebra or quagga mussels. Next slide. As we are the main delivery agency for invasive species education and outreach in the region, I'm sure you can imagine how our programming was impacted last year. 2020 had us focusing on transitioning most of our education programming to an online platform. We delivered 6 workshops, primarily to industry, with a focus on invasive plant ID that reached 60 people. We held our first webinar on priority plant ID and basic reporting. And then as restrictions began to loosen into the summer, we managed to interact directly with over 300 people at 6 BC Parks outreach booths and 1 farmers market. We organized one community weed pull, had one invasive plant walk, and even put on one kids camp. And we also continue to offer weed pull stipends to community groups. And next slide. We connected with our communities through our social media platforms, newsletters, and our website, of which we had nearly 3,000 unique visitors to the website. We put 4 new videos on YouTube, including our first webinar. We published 11 monthly newsletters with over 360 regular readers, and posted weekly on Instagram and Facebook, reaching over 800 subscribers. Now we'll move on to Danny with some 2021 highlights.
Sorry, Danny, I'm just going to interrupt just for a second. We can hear somebody's rustling or something. Can everyone just double check that they are muted, just so we can have a little better audio? Thanks very much. Danny, you can go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks, Gabriella and Katie. So yeah, I'm just going to give a really quick high-level overview of how the 2021 season has been. So we continue to deliver primarily fee-for-service work, and our main funders are mostly Flimro and Moti. Our in-house field staff conduct a large amount of mechanical treatment, as well as invasive plant inventories and chemical treatment monitoring. In 2021, we worked with 4 area controllers to conduct work on public lands, as well as 5 GREP rancher sprayers who conduct chemical treatments on Crown land range tenures. We continue to grow our invasive species management plan development. So in early 2021, we developed an invasive species management plan for Agm community, and we're currently working with Tobacco Plains Indian Band on an invasive plant management plan as well. We continue to conduct invasive mussel monitoring across the East Kootenays as well, and that's monetarily supported through the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation. And then lastly, we continue to be the main delivery agent for invasive species outreach and education. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview of EKISC revenue over the past few years. So as you can see, we've kind of slowly grown over time. In 2021, we broke the $1 million mark. So that's pretty exciting and pretty cool. So we have, yeah, just increased over the length of EKISC. Next slide, please. Awesome, thanks. So then the final few slides here, I just wanted to highlight a few projects that we've been working on over the past year, that past few years, I guess, that EKISC is really honored to be part of. So the first one, I think a lot of you are aware of, the Elk Valley Invasive Plant Management project. So 2021 was year 2. So just a background, in 2019, EKISC met with various land managers and local user groups to discuss the growing concern of invasive species and the impacts to wild spaces in the Elk Valley. And this led to a multi-year project being developed and supported by a variety of folks. It's a really large-scale collaborative project. So funders include HCTF, FWCP, local clubs, and many others. As I said, 2021 was year 2 of the project, and it shifted from a large-scale inventory focus that was done in year 1, so last year, to a much larger invasive plant treatment focus this year, and it went really, really well. Just some stats that are showing on the screen. So 425 treatment sites covering over 320 kilometers of FSRs, recreation trails, and deactivated roads. 47 new inventory points were collected this year at locations that we couldn't access last year. We collected data from our permanent monitoring plots that were installed, delivered an education workshop, and continued engagement with a lot of stakeholders. Next slide, please. The next one is the Wycliffe Conservation Complex. So in 2020 and the beginning of 2021, EKISC developed an invasive species management plan for the 1,109 hectare complex. So 2021 was year 2 of the project's implementation, and EKISC was contracted to conduct invasive plant treatments as well as collect data at the permanent monitoring plots that were implemented there as well. Data analysis hasn't been completed yet, but from the monitoring side of it, treatments were successful, and we're excited to hopefully continue working on that project. And the next slide, please. Thank you. And then the last project that I just wanted to highlight is our work with BC Parks out at Dewar Creek Hot Springs. So this is a much smaller scale project, but we're still really honored to continue working with BC Parks on this one, and working to contain an orange hookweed infestation at the hot springs. I'm sure most people are aware that there was a fire in the area this year, but luckily, despite that fire, we still managed to get in and continue our treatment momentum. And that was year 4 of the project, so it's going really well. So that's it. Those are a few operational projects amongst a lot of them, amongst a lot that EKISC works on, and it was really great to work on them again this year. And we just wanted to thank you funders for continuing to work with EKISC to manage weeds at the landscape level. And I'll pass it off to Emma to provide the education and communications update for 2021.
Thanks, Danny. As to be expected, we had to continue primarily with online programming this year. And that sort of took place in workshops and webinars. So we put on 2 industry workshops and also had 2 webinars this year. And those were targeting the general public. So one of them being Invasives 101 and the other was on weeds and wildflowers. And those webinars are available on our YouTube if you are interested in checking them out. We also managed to have 1 in-house workshop, and you can see the picture on the left-hand side. And this was for all the staff to get acquainted with basic grass ID. And that's for us to be able to better identify invasive grasses while in the field. We did get a chance to interact with the general public at 5 outreach booths in several BC parks. So the messaging alternated between terrestrial and aquatic species depending on which park we were at. So we directly interacted with over 230 people at these events and were able to distribute a lot of additional resources. So invasive species pamphlets, different identification books, plant-wise native plant info, and then some EKISC swag as well. And we did 2 successful community weed pulls, one in the around Lazy Lake and the other in the Elko area. And we helped out with 2 additional weed pulls, one of them being with the Vahana goats. There's a picture there. And this was to tackle spotted knapweed in the Lois Creek trails in Kimberley. And the next slide, please. So due to the limitations on public gatherings, we did have to focus a lot of our effort on engaging with our community through our social media platforms. So we continue to deliver invasive species messaging on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, in our monthly newsletter on YouTube, and our education assistant this summer actually developed a TikTok for us, which was pretty exciting. Thought it was a way to sort of branch out into new audiences. And that actually had over 7,000 views and over 1,000 likes on our video. So that was pretty successful. Our Facebook page reached over 12,000 individuals, and our Instagram page had over 12,000 visitors as well. So that's so far in 2021. So we'll continue sort of reaching out to the general public through those avenues.
Awesome. Thank you, Emma. All right, so now we're gonna move into our partner organization and funder updates. We will be hearing from BC Parks first. Amanda Weber-Roy has provided an update for Gabriella to present here today. And then we will move on with Joe Strong from NTBC, Todd Larson with Flinward, and Mark Trudeau with the Rocky Mountain Trent Society. So Gabriella, you can kick it off, please.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Yeah, again, I'm doing this on behalf of Amanda Weber-Roy and BC Parks. So in 2020, BC Parks revealed their 2020-2025 invasive species strategy plan, a deliverable of the action plan for conservation. I was unable to find this plan online, but if anyone is interested, we can put you in touch with Amanda. So subsequent work on invasive species management is based around this plan. In 2020, 9 BC parks were part of invasive plant treatment, including Columbia Lake Park, Dry Gulch, Kickaman Creek Park, Premier Lake, Moy, Norbury, and Wassa, as well as the Elk Valley and Dewar Hot Springs, which Danny already touched on. The bulk of work in the parks were chemical treatments, with some mechanical work done by our in-house crew and BC Parks Junior Rangers. The main species treated in parks were spotted knapweed, diffuse knapweed, blueweed, St. John's wort, orange and yellow hawkweed, and 1 rush skeleton weed site at Kickaman Provincial Park. Reseeding also occurred at Kickaman last year. At Premier Lake Park, consistent with ecosystem restoration objectives, chemical treatment infestations were conducted to manage the spotted knapweed and sulfur cinquefoil infestations. And spotted knapweed was also the main target invasive at Moy, Norbury, and Wassa, and leafy spurge was also treated at Norbury. In 2021, 9 parks again were the focus, mostly a continuation of the work plan from 2020, with the additional park of Morrissey being added and no treatments occurring at Moy. In addition, all outreach activities were funded by the Park Enhancement Fund. And that's it from BC Parks.
Awesome, thank you, Gabriella. If anyone has any questions about any of these updates, just please put them in the chat box and we can address them after the presentation. Joe, are you there? And are you ready to do an update on behalf of the Nature Trust? There you are.
You bet. Can you hear me okay there, Katie?
Yes, I can. Thanks.
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Joe Strong, the Kootenay Conservation Land Coordinator for the Nature Trust of BC, for those who don't know me. It was a good year for the Nature Trust, I guess, and partners in terms of invasive plant management this year. We did our usual sort of maintenance treatments on conservation lands, a number of contracts through EKISC all the way up sort of north to Edgewater, down to Sparwood, Gold Creek in the South Country, and all through the Trench. The big projects that we worked on this year, like Danny mentioned, was the Wycliffe invasive plant management plan. And that's, I won't speak much to that because Danny did a good job, but that is a partnership between the Nature Trust of BC, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and Flinro. There's a bunch of conservation parcels in that area that make up the complex. The other big one is the Big Ranch parcel, and that's, we've got a 5-year restoration project happening there with significant investments into some ER treatments. So a big portion of that in the early stages is to do a bunch of inventory and treatments on invasive plants. So that's thanks to, like Danny mentioned, the Elk Valley Invasive Plant Management Project. They put in a bunch of support last year and this year in inventory and treatments. Also, the Big Ranch Ecosystem Enhancement Project, which is primarily funded through CBT, has put in a bunch of money into that area as well. The Sparwood District Rod and Gun, Fish and Wildlife Association, they're the proponents of that project, and they've put in a bunch of time and effort into seeing that one through. And they're the eyes and ears sort of on the ground down there. So a shout out to those guys for helping out with that. Above and beyond sort of the normal maintenance stuff, we had a bunch of effort for mechanical treatments this year. That goes to sort of more funding for us to hire a larger conservation crew with dedication to sort of inventory on properties that we've overlooked in the past. As well, there was a bunch of extra support from EKISC for mechanical treatments and Flinro as well. So it seemed like we were able to tick off a lot of boxes that we've had to pass over the last few years. So I would say that was a big piece. We worked in coordination with Flinro a lot this year. We've got a lot of properties that are co-managed with them. So our crews would work with their crews and EKISC crews on some priority projects on conservation lands. Bull River was one, the Bummers Flats, Blue Stripe. There's a pollinator project as well. A lot of those things got a lot of momentum this year, and we're hoping we can keep keep moving forward with that next year. I think that's pretty much it for me. If anyone has any specific questions about properties, feel free to reach out.
That's great. Thanks, Joe. All right. Next, again, if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat box and we can address them at the end of the presentations or throughout the AGM. Next, we have Todd Larson with the Ministry of Forest, Lands and Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development. Hi, Todd.
Hey, Katie, thanks. I was going to share my screen. Can you stop sharing, Katie, please? And then I can check this out here. Yeah. Okay. Does that work like that? Okay, right on. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I'm Todd. I'm with the Ministry of Forests. As Katie mentioned there, I'm the range habitat specialist. And yeah, I wanted to just provide a brief update of our role from the district level, not from the invasive plant team, but our role here with work planning and supporting EKISC. I help with the general work plan of operations. The invasive plant team, so Val Miller's shop, provides about $230,000 to EKISC, and I think about $25,000 goes to communications, coordination, awareness, and the remainder, $200,000, is for operations regionally. So we help direct where the priorities are for that, and I'll get into how we go about that work planning aspect. I'm also supported by Alana Ostrich and Shauna Larad, who work develop that work plan. Shauna Larad is on the board, which is a significant contribution from the Ministry of Forest as well. And there's many other staff in the district that provide some other projects and the project management for that with delivery by EKISC. And on top of that, we encourage all field staff within the ministry to report weeds when they see them and monitor and let us know where they are so that we have more eyes on the ground to support that. So the planning within the district kind of follows this sequence. The first step is review what was done in the previous year or previous years as well. This screenshot here shows a map of the whole EKISC operating area, which generally aligns with the Rocky Mountain District area. And I've got two, I think 2019 is the yellow pins, and then 2020 is the circles. It gets pretty muddled because there's, like Gabriella said, about 3,000 treatments each year. So there's a lot on the go. And then we assess any priority and newly recorded weed sites. So those would be highlighted for treatment in the following year. We compile a summary of all planned weed treatment projects on Crown land, and I'll go into that on the next slide here. And because the funding comes from the invasive plant team, we work with Val Miller and previously Catherine McRae to ensure that we're in line with the priorities there. And that helps to develop the work plan based on these previous treatments, what the regional priorities might be, our long-term strategy, some efficiencies with adjacent projects. And this is all done using like a values-based approach where we're looking at what we're trying to achieve and how we can best do that with the generally limited resources that we have, and how can we get the best bang for our buck there to ensure that the resources are protected. And then we coordinate with EKISC for delivery, and there's a lot of back and forth on how we can best deliver this, and check-ins on what's working and not. And then we evaluate for effectiveness. So that's this winter we'll be looking at how 2021 went, and then repeat the whole process for the next year. So in terms of reviewing the previous treatments, we can do a summary on IAP, get a data extract of certain areas or species, and can overlay that onto a map. Like I've got a screenshot here of kind of the South Country area. It's important to know what was planned the previous year and what was actually completed, because sometimes we say we'd like this whole polygon to be treated, then we'll move to another area the next year. So it's important that we check to see what was done and if there's any need for follow-up that year. We look at successes and challenges, and a really important part is speaking with EKISC staff, the land managers, and the contractors during the debrief to see if what worked and what didn't work and how we can refine for the next year. So we're just continually improving each year. I think a critical piece that Flynn Rowe is contributing to the delivery in the East Kootenay here is the ability to leverage the base money that's provided from the invasive plant team, that $200,000 mark, and how we're able to leverage that with other planned invasive plant projects on Crown land. So here's just kind of a list of several of them. One of them, Peckham's pasture near Fort Steele. There's a multi-year project there. So there's about $30,000 for invasive plant management that is in addition, and then we can leverage that with some of the Flynn Rowe base money as well. Similarly, the Kootenay area, there was $20,000 this year and last year that is matched from Kootenay, as well as provided that some of the base money is supplied in that region too. We had some additional money for the cemetery pasture near Baines Lake, where we're providing some funding for that, and then that's matched with some of the base money. And then some of the other partners and funders that we work with, specifically habitat restoration enhancement with road deactivation and ecosystem restoration projects. For example, in the Bull River, there's a 5-year project to treat weeds, reseed, fertilize in some aspects, and the success of that has really informed direction of future integrated invasive plant management. So I think that's a really interesting and critical piece of this whole partnership here as well. And lastly on this slide too, it's zoomed out for the whole area, but during the MAP meeting in the fall, anyone who's considering work on Crown land can look at kind of provides their plans for the following year, and then that helps inform our planning for the next year too. So you've got polygons of planned works, so that kind of helps us to plan for the next year. So it's good to know what's going on so we can help leverage the dollars and have a better plan for each year. And that all feeds into the work plan, where we take that budget, carve off some for administration. The priority 1 treatments is the priority, of course. EKISC is able to support with the in-house field crew for inventory, biocontrol, and some mechanical work. And then our approach has been to, on some of the Forest Service roads, is this backcountry in approach, where we're starting at the end of the road, coming back in to treat the weeds that have been moving up the road, and that way we're kind of pushing it back into the valleys and away from the high elevation areas where they can go unchecked for years. So our focus recently has been really trying to go into some of these areas we haven't been in a while and keep them pristine if we can, and combat the weeds that are moving on there. And then there's several special projects, wildfire recovery, and we're looking at priority ranking with site-specific and species-specific priorities, and working with contractors on ensuring that our direction is clear for the contractors there. And finally, we're continuing to support Flynn Rowe staff on weed ID and reporting, and working with EKISC to help educate our staff on how to do that, so we have more eyes on the ground to find where the weeds are and then treat them as we go along. Thanks for your time. I'll stop sharing here.
Thanks, Todd. Yeah, brief overview, but a lot goes into developing an invasive plant management plan. I'll go back to you. There we are. Am I sharing the right screen? Does everyone see that? Perfect, great. All right, and now we're going to move on to Mark Trudeau with the Rocky Mountain Trench Society. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Katie, thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Trudeau. I'm the Rocky Mountain Trench Society coordinator. The Trench Society was established in 1996 and is a coalition of 9 ranching, hunting, environmental, and wildlife organizations. And we've kind of worked together to basically restore and conserve grasslands sort of in the open forest in the East Kootenays here. Yeah, we work really closely, obviously, with the EKISC annually for our ecosystem restoration projects. And it's sort of a collaborative effort between basically Flinro, EKISC, and ourselves. Last year, we had a pretty regular year, I would say, as far as just typical inventorying and maintenance, chemical follow-up treatments. But we inventoried probably about a little over 500 hectares in areas such as the Hatchery Ridge area near the fish hatchery, on the Pommy conservation lands, and near Johnson Lake recreation site. We also did some treatments in one of our larger project areas called Indian Springs near the Cranbrook International Airport, as well as we're kind of following up on a prescribed burn that we did north of that area in 2018 on the old Agm burn. We also had follow-up chemical treatments on the old Kimberley Airport prescribed burn area, as well as Lost Springs pasture, which is sort of in that same area just northeast of Kimberley here. As Todd mentioned, we did some work out in cemetery pasture, as well as Rabbit Mountain, which is beside Elko there. So yeah, we basically, as Todd mentioned, we sort of meet up annually in our fall map meetings to provide sort of project areas where we're working. And then we usually get together with EKISC to sort of share our projects that we hope to follow up with on the following season. So it's sort of, it's been really great working with EKISC, and that's pretty much what we have for, yeah, that we've done this year in 2021. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. We also enjoy working with the Trench Society. There's some really cool projects that you guys are doing, and we like to be a part of them. So, all right. So now we've got a quick break. We're a little ahead of schedule, so let's just take a 10-minute break. Grab a coffee or a snack, and when we come back, we will be doing two of our 3 keynote speakers. So we'll have Jay Mangold and Catherine Tarasoff coming up next. So we'll all come back here at 10:25. All right, thanks. All right, we'll just give everyone 30 more seconds or so to come back from a break. Okay, so let's commence, and we'll start with our first keynote speaker out of three. We have Jane Mangold joining us. Jane is a professor and an extension specialist at Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana. She develops and shares science-based information on the management of invasive plants on range and wildlands throughout Montana and the West. Hi, Jane. Welcome to the AGM, and thanks for presenting today.
Hi, Katie, and hello to the rest of you. Thanks for the invitation to be here. We'll see if I can get my screen shared successfully.
Great. Great.
Let me pull up the presentation mode here and do a little switching around and hopefully get it the way we want to have it for everybody to see. All right, are you seeing the full version of the presentation?
Yep, it looks great.
Okay, good deal. Well, good morning, everybody. And again, thank you for inviting me to be part of your meeting this year. Someday, I hope I can come up to one of your meetings in person. It's such a beautiful part of the world, and I'd love to be there. So we're going to talk a little bit about managing weeds after wildfire. Wildfire is a hot topic, pardon the pun. And we've all been dealing with some, fairly severe wildfire seasons the last couple years. And the climate change predictions suggest that, we may be dealing with the new normal. So I think it's really important to think about how we manage weeds in the context of wildfire. So I'm going to be speaking today, limited time. Obviously, this is a very complex topic. We have limited time together today. I'm going to try to cover 4 main aspects of wildfire and weeds. And I really will be speaking in generalizations today. And we know that each site can be very unique. So we're going to speak in generalizations, but hopefully this will give you some broad ideas to think about as you deal with invasive plants and weeds after wildfire. And I also want to mention that all of this information that I'll be breezing through today is covered in this MSU extension publication that is available online. And I believe the link to that will be shared in the chat box today. So you can always go there and read more about this. So we're going to cover these 4 broad topics. We're going to start with fire effect on plants, okay? So when you have a disturbance like fire, it results in an increase in essential resources for plants. Nutrients, water, and light all increase after fire. And this is due to a couple different reasons. For one thing, there's this pulse and resource supply because the plant material has all burned up and you're left with a lot of minerals and nutrients that are waiting to be taken up and formed into new plant material. At the same time, because a lot of plants have been destroyed by the fire, you have an overall decline in resource use by plants. So it's kind of like a double whammy. You get a resource pulse, but also a decline in the uptake of resources. So there's a lot of resources available for plants to use. And if you think about, well, we're all very familiar, I'm assuming, with the idea of succession and how plant communities change over time. So after a disturbance, whether it's wildfire or something else, it's very likely that colonizing plants will show up first. And if you think about some of the traits of your favorite weeds compared to the traits of colonizing plants, things like growth rate, seed production, ability to thrive in high resource availability, and dominating after a disturbance, invasive plants have all those traits, just like native colonizing plants might have. So, you know, weeds act like weeds, and they're probably going to want to take advantage of a disturbance like wildfire. So to support this point, I'd like to show you some data from a study that Jim Jacobs and Roger Sheely did. This is almost 20 years ago that they did this work, but I think the work is very demonstrative of what happens after fire. So with this data I'm showing, in this situation, they sampled toad flax biomass and seed production after a prescribed burn in a rangeland setting. And this was in Southwest Montana. And they found that at 2 out of the 3 sites, let's see, site 1 and site 3, they saw this increase in Dalmatian toad flax biomass. So here we're looking at biomass in pounds per acre. I apologize for the English units. We are stuck in English units in the US, it seems to be. And this is kind of interesting because if you look at the percent increase in Dalmatian toad flax biomass in burned versus not burned, at site 1, there was about 110% increase in the biomass. Site 2, it wasn't significant. I mean, it looks like an increase, but statistically, it didn't pan out. And then at site 3, there was about a 330% increase in toad flax biomass in burned areas versus non-burned areas. Looking at the effects of fire on the seed production of toad flax, in this case, all 3 sites saw a large increase, especially site 1 and site 3, in terms of large increase in the number of seeds produced by a single Dalmatian toad flax plant. So just for example, site 1, it went from about 350 seeds per plant in a burned area to compared to about 7 seeds per plant in a non-burned area. So the toad flax responded very positively. Now, grass biomass also increased. You know, a lot of our species evolved with fire, and fire is in general a very positive thing for a lot of species. They're going to increase as well. So if you look at the fire effects on the grass biomass at this site, or at these 3 sites, we also saw an increase in grass biomass at site 1 and site 3. However, the magnitude of that increase in biomass was not as great with the grass as it was with the weedy invader Dalmatian toad flax. This was about a 75% increase, and this was about a 63% increase. And if you remember from the toad flax, it was like 100 and 300% increase, okay? So when we think about the fire effect on plants, it's positive for a lot of our species in this part of the world, but weeds may take advantage of that, that disturbance to a greater extent than native perennial plants. So when we think about managing weeds after fire, you know, we're faced with a situation where native plants can increase, but if weeds are present, and depending on the abundance of the weeds prior to the fire, they could also increase as well. And I think that's what makes it challenging to kind of approach this topic and try to figure out what might happen on any given site. So one of the things we can do to try to help us sort this out is to think about 2 things. And that is how severely did the fire burn, and how abundant were noxious weeds prior to the fire. And those two elements can play a big role in whether or not natural recovery will happen, or if we need to take, more extensive measures like revegetation. So let's talk about that. That's our next topic on the outline. And this is a table that's taken directly from that publication, the MSU Extension publication. And it's a way to try to estimate burn severity. Now, I am not a fire ecologist by any stretch of the imagination. And I guess that makes me appreciate a table like this, because it kind of, it simplifies some factors that I could look at on a landscape to try to assess burn severity. So those factors, or those characteristics, include soil, duff and debris, the color of the ash that's produced, what do the small stumps and small fuels look like after the fire, and then is there any soil hydrophobicity. And we're not going to go over this table, cell by cell, but you can see that with low severity, there are certain things you would look at with each of these characteristics to try to determine it, to tell if the fire was low, medium, or high severity, okay? So post-fire, you would want to be out on the ground and trying to assess the severity of the fire. Now, the other element that I said is important to think about in terms of predicting how well an area will recover naturally, or how extensive your management needs to be, is the abundance of weeds prior to the fire. So I say this is like know thy enemy. This is where all that work you've done prior to a fire in terms of mapping, monitoring, and surveying comes into play and becomes very helpful. So knowing where your weeds are pre-fire helps us to know what to expect and where to prioritize our management after the fire. So if you can cross these two elements, or these two factors of noxious weed cover prior to the fire and burn severity, we can set up this matrix that helps us determine whether natural recovery is likely, and really how aggressive we need to be managing weeds post-fire. So if you're in a situation where noxious weed cover is absent to moderate, and burn severity was low to medium, so you're kind of hanging out in this quadrant of the table. Whoops, what am I doing here? There we go. If you're in one of these areas, there's higher likelihood of natural recovery. You'll still have to do some weed management, but the native plants that were there prior to the fire are probably also going to come back really well and compete with those weeds. If you get into this section where you have high burn severity and high abundance of noxious weeds prior to the fire, that's where you're going to have to do some fairly aggressive management, including perhaps revegetation. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I'd like to demonstrate some of these concepts with a data set that was collected after the Bitterroot fires. That was a big fire. 2000 was a big fire year in the Bitterroot National Forest, which is here on the border between Montana and Idaho. And this photo was an iconic photo that was captured that year when the Bitterroot forest was burning up. And fortunately, after this fire, there was a fairly, I think it's a fairly extensive monitoring that occurred specific to spotted knapweed. The Bitterroot forest has historically had a lot of spotted knapweed, and there were a lot of concerns about what spotted knapweed would do after this fire. So there's a group of researchers, Ferguson et al., who they monitored 71 different stands across the forest and had 4 plots in each of those stands for a total of about 280 plots that they monitored. And here we're looking at spotted knapweed occurrence after the Bitterroot wildfires in 2000. And they did this 1 year after the fire, 3 years after the fire, and 5 years after the fire. And I think and what we're looking at here is if you see like 57%, that means out of those 280 some plots that they monitored, 57% of them had spotted knapweed present in the plot. Okay, so that's not like the cover of spotted knapweed, it's just occurrence, frequency of occurrence across the 280 plots. So if you look across these data, you can kind of pick out some trends. So let's look first at what happened in the low severity fire, the areas that were burned at low severity. Here's in the Doug fir stands, the subalpine fir stands, and then total. So across multiple types of forest stands. And what you'll see there is that at low severity, weeds were present at first, but they were less likely to increase or persist over time. And this is especially evident if you look across all 284 plots that they monitored. Spotted knapweed was present in 43% 1 year after the fire. By 5 years after the fire, it was present in 18% of those plots. So it's still there, but it wasn't this huge explosion of spotted knapweed that you might think it would be. Now, as you think about moving into more severe fires, so here we're looking at medium and high severity fires, you see a little bit different trend. And again, if you just look at the total, in general, we're seeing weeds maybe not as prevalent at first, but they have a higher likelihood to increase over time. That was especially prevalent in the Doug fir stands, not so much in the subalpine fir, but then if you look at the total, you see that increase over time, over the 5-year period. The other important piece of information I think to take from this data set is that some plant communities are more vulnerable to invasion following fire than others. And those Doug fir stands were particularly susceptible to an increase in spotted knapweed after the fire compared to the subalpine fir. Okay, so there's a real rich data set here to draw some generalizations from. We'll just kind of summarize it here in this slide. So thinking about burn severity and noxious weeds and the likelihood of natural recovery. In low severity fires, it's common to see an increase in weeds initially, but those weeds may not increase or persist over time. That's compared to high severity sites where you might have fewer weeds initially because everything just really burned up and it's hard for everything to recover. But you might see a faster rate of increase and the weeds may persist longer. And then the final point to make in this regard is that it does depend on the plant community. And generally speaking, at higher elevation, more moist sites, weeds are typically less of a concern than if you're at lower elevation and drier sites. Okay, so that's what I would like to say about that portion of the presentation today, thinking about burn severity, noxious weeds, and the likelihood of natural recovery. We're going to move on and talk a little bit about fire suppression and weeds. I think one of the things we're learning about, or we're learning as we deal with wildfires on the landscape, especially in this era of having non-native invasive plants on the landscape as well, is that sometimes the things we do to fight a wildfire can lead to an increase in weeds, more so than perhaps the fire itself. And I'm going to share a story with you that occurred on one of our research ranches here in Southwest Montana. This is the MSU's Red Bluff Research Ranch, about 30 miles west of Bozeman, near Norris, Montana. And there was a wildfire that burned here in 2012. It's a rangeland setting. You can see that in the background. And fortunately, some of my colleagues here at MSU did some monitoring specifically for cheatgrass after this fire, because in other parts of the Western US anyway, we've seen this positive relationship between fire and cheatgrass. So cheatgrass increases after fire and leads to more wildfires, and there's kind of a positive feedback cycle. So the situation that arose here was that there was parts of the ranch that were not, there were parts of the ranch that burned. Those are shown, you can see that on the left, the down slope side of this hillside. And then areas that did not burn because a fire break was run across the landscape to stop the fire from moving uphill any further. This was a dozer line. So my colleagues actually collected data in the burned area, the non-burned area, and the fire break for 3 years after this fire burned. And prior to the fire, I mean, there's cheatgrass out here, but it wasn't a problem. You know, it wasn't something that you'd be thinking, oh, we really need to take some aggressive management against cheatgrass in this area. And this is what they found. We're looking at, remember the fire burned in 2012, and we're looking at 1 year after the fire, 2 years after the fire, and 3 years after the fire. And what we're looking at here is percent cover of cheatgrass. And the green line is the non-burned area that they monitored. The black line is the burned area. And then the kind of the red line is actually where the dozer line was put in. And I think it's pretty easy to see that the building the dozer line, running the dozer line across that landscape led to a fairly substantial increase in cheatgrass. You know, we were looking at 2 and 3 years after the fire, 30% cover of cheatgrass compared to, 5 to 10% cover of cheatgrass in the non-burned or the burned area. And here's just a photo to show what that looked like. This was, I think this picture was taken about probably 5 years post fire. And you obviously can see that dozer line. This is late in the summer. You can see the dead cheatgrass from the previous year's growth. I will say that we've continued to follow this dozer line, and we actually did some integrated cheatgrass management along that dozer line. We tested some different treatments, including grazing and herbicides. And this dozer line does look a lot better today than it did 3 years after the fire. The perennial grasses are coming back. There's still quite a bit of cheatgrass there, but I think the perennial grasses are catching up to it. So to think about fire suppression activities and weed management, I would encourage you to focus and maybe prioritize weed management in those areas where there's been heavy fire suppression activities. So things like these fuel breaks or fire lines, maybe equipment staging areas where you've had a lot of disturbance with people and equipment moving around, and also potentially moving new seeds into an area. And then there has been some work that has shown that cheatgrass increased in areas where fire retardant was dropped. If you think about it, some of that retardant is, it's like fertilizer for weeds, including cheatgrass. So I encourage people to focus their weed management in these high impact areas. And you'll want to monitor, know what the plant is doing, know what the plants are doing. I love to hear about all the monitoring efforts that are happening there with your group. Be looking for new species that maybe you didn't have before that could have come in on some equipment or personnel. Treat weeds in these areas because they may increase there more greatly than other areas. And then this would be a place where you might want to do some revegetation. Okay, I'm going to end on a positive note and think about how we might view fire actually as an opportunity for weed management. And I'm going to focus specifically, just say a few quick things about chemical control and revegetation. So if we're using herbicides primarily to manage weeds, if you think about post-fire, weeds are very visible. This is a picture of some common tansy that's growing along a burned riverbank. This is in the Bitterroot Valley after a fire. And you can, those weeds, they're going to be some of the first things to green up, especially in the fall. If we've had, the fire season throughout the summer, and then we start getting some fall moisture, those weeds are going to be the first things to green up, and they become very visible. At the same time, a lot of that above ground standing litter has burned up in the fire, and you can actually get enhanced effectiveness with herbicides because you don't have all that dead material interfering with the herbicide making good contact with these fresh green actively growing leaves. And I like this shot because these are the old stems from common tansy, that's all been burned up, and there's not a lot of dead material to interfere with herbicides making good contact with the regrowth. So I think that, kind of depending on what the abundance of the weeds were pre-fire, that fire does present an opportunity to greatly reduce populations of weeds if we can get the timing of a herbicide application down. The other thing I want to talk about is revegetation. And really I think the big question is to seed or not to seed. We had a lot of fires in Montana this year. I've been asked this question, I don't know how many times this summer, kind of, the second half of the summer and into this fall, whether or not people should be putting seed down. And I would like to return to this table that we looked at earlier in the presentation, where we crossed the burn severity, low, medium, and high, with the degree of noxious weed cover from low to high. And in situations where it's high burn severity and high noxious weed cover, that's where it's more likely that you're going to have to revegetate, okay? And, even if it hadn't burned, but you were just managing weeds and had really high cover of weeds and not a lot else there to grow anymore, you may need to revegetate. But this is where we're looking at the need for revegetation, high severity fires and high abundance of noxious weeds prior to the fire. So if you are going to seed, know what you're getting into. There's been research just published fairly recently that suggests that post-fire seeding can have lasting effects on the composition of your plant community. So what you seed post-fire is going to be there for a long time. So make sure that you're seeding species that will meet your long-term management objectives. And the other thing I would say about revegetation, and again, this is going back to our conversation about the fire suppression activities and weeds, is with revegetation, focus on those high priority areas first, places like dozer lines, fire lines, because if you can get in there and seed something that is desirable and meets long-term management objectives, I think you'll be better off in the long term. So take-home points. Hopefully we're doing okay time-wise. Our take-home points for today. Fire stimulates growth of plants, both good and bad plants. Consider the severity of the burn and noxious weed abundance prior to the fire to help you develop your post-fire management plan. remember that fire suppression activities can increase weeds, and that's where I would prioritize your management first. And then finally, again, to leave on a positive note, fire can actually provide an opportunity for noxious weed and invasive plant management. So take advantage of that opportunity. Here is my contact information. You're more than welcome to reach out to me with questions about this or other questions about invasive plant management. Access our extension publications, including this one. Many of our publications are available online now, electronically. So they're out there for anyone to use, regardless of what side of the border you're on. And again, I just say thank you for giving me the opportunity to visit with you today. It's been a pleasure. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing because I think I can see everybody a little better then.
Thanks, Jane. That was a really great presentation. A lot goes into all the different kinds of fire and weeds. Yes. Weeds. We in East Kootenay, we've definitely have had our share of forest fires, and the next steps are really interesting. We I guess we've always wondered if it is best to go out immediately after post-fire to, chemically control invasive plants, or if you wait a year to see what's germinating and let it have that chance to do that. But you bring up good points that, the weeds do germinate first, and the visual of weeds will appear. But when you think about limited funding and trying to be the most efficient with your cost, I guess, what exactly is
yeah. One of the topics I didn't really get into is like resprouting weeds versus weeds that have to grow back from seeds, and which ones can be more problematic or more of an opportunity to manage post-fire. And those weeds that tend to resprout from creeping roots can be more problematic, and they're more opportunistic after a fire. So like common tansy, like the picture I showed, or if you think about creeping thistle, I won't say Canada thistle, creeping thistle, Dalmatian toad flax, some of these species that are just ready to go after a fire because they have a substantial root system. Those would be ones that I would think about prioritizing as well.
So definitely take a good pre-inventory, hopefully, of these fire areas, and then base your management off of that. I think we have a few questions in the chat box here. Todd, did you want to unmute yourself and you can ask your questions?
That was actually, I think that was Shauna. She just used my login to go in here. But, yeah.
Shauna, is Shauna here?
Yeah, so my question was, if you're aware, Jane, well, first off, I really appreciate the presentation. It was great information, and just left me with more questions always, right? And so just if you're aware of any research that has looked at ecosystem health prior to the wildfire event and the establishment of invasives tied to intensity as well, fire intensity.
Yeah, my guess is there is some work out there. I'm not aware of it, especially in terms of like invasive plant abundance prior to a fire. We never know exactly where the next place is going to burn. So it would kind of have to be just a fortuitous aligning of events. But yeah, that's a great question. I think it's worth looking into and see if there is anything out there in that regard.
Yeah, and I'm blurring the lines a little bit because we do some prescribed burning here in the East Kootenays. And so in the context of invasives and perennials that we have, like sulfur cinquefoil and St. John's wort on site prior to fire with unhealthy plant communities to begin with, the factors to think about in creating more disturbed ground, and that your health is already limited, that intensity of fire may be less of a factor in the establishment of those invasives or the success of those invasives.
Yeah, that's a great idea to use prescribed fire as kind of a substitute to learn some things about it. I think there has been work in the Great Basin region of the US in terms of annual grasses, like presence of annual grasses prior to large wildfires. So there's a growing body of literature, just because we've been dealing with like cheatgrass fires for many years now. So there is some information in that setting or that system.
Great. Moving on, we'll go to Jackie Rasmussen has a question. Jackie, would you like to unmute yourself? And we have a couple more minutes, and then we'll move on to Catherine Tarasoff.
Okay.
Oh, morning, everybody. I must have just raised my hand by accident. That was a fantastic presentation, super relevant to our area. So I'll let you carry on. Thank you so much for this presentation.
Yeah, you're welcome, Jackie. And I see you had a question in the chat, so I can just respond to that in the chat if we want to move on with the next presentation.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, let's move on to the next presentation. Emma also has a question in there, and if you can respond in the chat, that would be great. Hold on here. All right. Next up, we have Catherine Tarasoff with her presentation of could biocontrol resistance be a factor in the resurgence of St. John's wort? Catherine received her PhD in crop science with a minor in range ecology from Oregon State University in 2007. Her emphasis at OSU was weed science, and her interest focuses primarily on invasive species, in particular, the effects of invaders on community dynamics. Hi, Catherine, and are you able to screen share? Am I? Oh, yeah.
Am I screen sharing?
Sorry. Yes, sorry, that was my fault. I had
okay, great.
Couple windows open. Thanks, Catherine. Go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks everybody for joining me today. First, I didn't do this project on my own. I had a number of collaborators within Thompson Rivers University. Some are the biochemistry part of this presentation was done by Kingsley Donker and his grad students. So any questions about the biochemistry, I'll do my best, but it's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. So the title is, could biocontrol resistance be a factor in the resurgence of St. John's wort? And so first I just want to go through, I know many of you understand biocontrol, but I'm just going to give a really high level review of classical biocontrol. So it's usually initiated when we really can't control a weed on the landscape and the tools we have aren't working. So then we have to go to the host country and look for natural enemies of that weed, and they could be pathogens, insects, parasites. I'm focusing on insects. These particular insects go through a rigorous quarantine process, which I won't go into detail on. And when they are successful in the quarantine process, they're released into the new environment, which in our example, of course, is BC, and we monitor them for success. So attributes of a, quote, good biocontrol insect is a high reproductive rate, successfully able to find the host, be host specific, so there's no off-target damage. We don't want insects jumping from knapweed to strawberry plantations. Be well synchronized with its host so that when the insect is ready to utilize the host in whatever capacity it's going to use the host plant is ready to kind of receive the insect. So they have to be synchronized. And ideally, the insect is adaptable to many different environmental conditions so that it can spread effectively sort of into all the different ecosystem types and niches where the weed may be present. So I'm going to focus on St. John's wort. Around the 1930s, we had definitely 1 million hectares, maybe more, infested in Western North America. We know it's toxic to livestock. So in 1952, Peter Harris from Agri-Food Canada went to Russia and surveyed and found a bunch of insects. They went through the quarantine process, 4 Chrysalina species, passed the quarantine process, and were introduced into BC. Chrysalina hyperaceae was deemed to be the most successful and appropriate insect. Now, why is it so great? Well, females can lay up to 2,000 eggs. It has an amazing host-seeking ability. It's like it can smell the biochemical in the plant. It only attacks St. John's wort. Both the larvae, that's what you see in the top picture, and the adults feed heavily on St. John's wort. So they're a defoliator. They defoliate the leaves, the flowers, basically leaving just a skeleton of a stem of St. John's wort once they're done. They can tolerate a very wide range of environmental conditions, and they have long range dispersal via flight. So they are like, you know, jet planes that just fly right from one spot to another, and they can find that St. John's wort very readily. I've been in a pasture, you know, in the middle of a forested area with one St. John's wort plant, and this photo isn't from that site, but that's what it looked like. So a single St. John's wort growing in just old pasture surrounded by forest, and this Chrysalina beetle had found it. So, but then, you know, in conversations with people and my own observations, it seemed like the Chrysalina beetle wasn't controlling St. John's wort effectively anymore. And especially in the Kootenays and the boundary area, just an incredible resurgence of St. John's wort on the landscape. So thankfully, Peter Harris in the 1950s, when he did his first biocontrol releases for Chrysalina, he took photos. So this is just such a gift and so amazing to see what the St. John's wort looked like at this site known as Marsh Creek in 1952. It's near Fruitvale. So you can see, you know, really densely infested with St. John's wort. And then in 2002, so there's 50 years between the photos, don't really know if St. John's wort is reappearing in 2002 or if it's, you know, at its lowest point, because we don't have photos on between those 50 years, but this is what it looked like in 2002. And then by 2011, we start to see more St. John's wort popping up and continuing to 2015. So the photo documentation is just so awesome because it helps to set the stage and to sort of show the progression of the effect of the Chrysalina beetle over those, well, now 75 years. So I want to give a little bit of a background on the biochemistry of St. John's wort. So when, you know, when I sort of dove into this project, which started really in 2015, even though the bulk of the work that I'm showing is from 2018, I had an undergrad student do a lot of work looking at the glands and the biochemistry in the leaf glands. And many of you might know that when you hold St. John's wort leaves up to the sun, it looks like they're perforated. Well, those perforations are actually translucent oil glands on the leaf where hyperforin is accumulated. And hyperforin is a biochemical in St. John's wort, and it's incredibly stable. And what I mean by stable is that it's a predatory defense chemical, and it doesn't change with defoliation. So when St. John's wort is defoliated, the level of hyperforin doesn't change in the plant. Whereas hypericin, it accumulates in these dark leaf glands, these black dots that maybe look like mold, but they're not. They're dark leaf glands, and hypericin accumulates there, and hypericin is incredibly responsive to defoliation. Within 12 hours of any defoliation, the hypericin levels just go way up because it's a predatory defense biochemical. And hypericin, interestingly, is also the chemical that the pharmaceutical industry uses for the antidepressant. So we know it's super responsive to defoliation because the pharmaceutical industry wants a lot of it. And so they've done a bunch of experiments where they've defoliated St. John's wort. The hypericin has just skyrocketed, and then they harvest the St. John's wort and extract the hypericin. So we know it's very responsive, and the amount of hypericin varies widely depending on sort of the stress and the defoliation that the plant is under. Whereas hyperforin is very stable and defoliation won't affect hyperforin. We also know from the work that Christy did in 2015 that there's a highly variable number of leaf glands on St. John's wort. And she looked at herbarium samples from the 1930s, so before biocontrol was introduced into BC. And she took herbarium samples and she counted the number of translucent and dark colored glands across 5 different locations and multiple plants within each location. And the variability was really high across populations and within populations. So number of leaf glands is a very, very variable trait in St. John's wort. So knowing that we couldn't just say, oh, St. John's wort should have, 20 translucent leaf glands per centimeter squared. We know it's super variable. We worked with local land managers in the East Kootenays to select sites where the biocontrol had been incredibly successful in the past, but was no longer working as well. And then of course we sampled Marsh Creek too, because that's our oldest release site that we have in the province. So it provides just a great, home marker for long-term exposure to biocontrol. At Marsh Creek, we just had 1 population. At Wigwam, we had 3 distinct populations. And at Kootenay Cemetery, we had 5 distinct populations that we sampled from. And what we did was to collect 15 susceptible and resistant plants per population, so up to 15, because in some sites, it was actually very hard to find susceptible plants. It was a low bug year. That's the only thing I can sort of say. I don't know what it's normally like out in the East Kootenays, but it's some sites, in particular Cemetery, Kootenay, it was hard to find susceptible plants that had evidence of feeding. But I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So how did I determine susceptible versus this potentially resistant category? And all I had to go on, because nobody's looked at this, is I called plants susceptible if I saw any evidence of feeding on leaves. So the plants were closely inspected. If there was any evidence of feeding, they fell into the susceptible category. And then for the resistant, it was that there was no evidence of feeding, but neighboring plants did have feeding. So if I looked at a plant and I couldn't see any feeding, and then I looked around and 5 or 6 of the plants around that potentially resistant plant had feeding on them, then I said, okay, you fall into the resistant category. So I know it seems very subjective, and it was, but it was based on this priority categories at the first step when we went out into the field. So we brought all these plants back, and there was probably, I don't even know, over a couple hundred. And we looked at plant height, leaf area, dark gland density per centimeter squared, light gland density per centimeter squared. And then we used HPLC for extracting hyperforin, hypericin, and then this intermediate biochemical called pseudohypericin. It's like it's on its way to becoming hypericin. Okay, then after we made all those measurements and we did the biochemical analysis, we also looked at defoliation of these plants. So we collected naive insects from the Kamloops area. So the assumption is these insects have not been exposed to potentially resistant plants. We starved them for 24 hours. We did what's called a no-choice feeding experiment, where you force the insect to feed by putting them on the plant material. They have no choice. They can't walk away and go on to a different plant. And we allowed them to feed for 2 hours. And then we measured defoliation as a percent of the leaf or leaves that were consumed. So once a bite was taken out of a leaf, then we measured how much of that leaf did they eat. Because there were lots of leaves to choose from, and we wanted to know how much, once they start feeding on a leaf, how much do they eat? The chrysalina beetle is very much like the way we eat corn. They start on the edge of the leaf and they just zigzag back and forth until they hit the mid rib of the leaf. And then they go over to the other side of the leaf and they start on the edge and they zigzag back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. They usually finish one leaf before they move on to another leaf. Okay, so here's some results, and it's quite interesting, I think, that that we had the 3 locations, and the 3 locations all showed different results. So Marsh Creek, when we look at the hyperforin, and recall hyperforin is very stable in a plant, so it does not increase following defoliation. It's like the level of hyperforin in the plant is almost set, from the get-go in the plant. So we do see higher levels of the hyperforin in the plant. There's no relationship between levels of hyperforin and the number of translucent leaf glands. So it's strictly a concentration, and you can't count the number of leaf glands and sort of determine how much hyperforin would be in the plant based on the number of leaf glands. When we look at Kekkoman Cemetery, this is one of those sites where we could not find susceptible plants. So yes, it looks like, well, look how different those are, super different. But the reality is we only had 1 susceptible plant. So it's really hard to say what's happening there. Is it that there's like all the plants, that we have almost 100% plants that are falling into this potentially resistant classification? Or is it just a function of the fact that it was a very low year for insects, and so there just wasn't a lot of activity? So that's a site that is really very uncertain, and I really don't know what's happening at Kekkoman Cemetery area. Then when we go down to Wigwam, we had lots of plants to choose from in both categories at Wigwam. We had 15 susceptible, 15 resistant across 3 populations, and there was no difference between those. So in my mind, there's no evidence that anything is possibly happening at Wigwam. Or more samples need to be collected. Like I said earlier, the hypericin is incredibly variable and responsive to defoliation. And then of course, hyperforin is very stable, and it might take a very long time for hyperforin levels to adjust to the effect of defoliation from the biocontrol. So Wigwam, maybe it's just too early to see what might be happening at Wigwam, whereas Marsh Creek has had over 70 years of insect presence. So I'm going to focus on Marsh Creek for the rest of the presentation because Kekkoman Cemetery and Wigwam, all the rest of the results I'm going to present, it was the same story. Either I can't tell because I didn't have enough samples, or there's just no difference. So when we look at the dark glands where the hypericin is produced, the resistant, what we're calling resistant, and like just see me air quoting it every time, the resistant plants had more dark glands, and the resistant plants also had more light glands where the hyperforin is accumulating. We also found some interesting physical traits. The resistant plants had much larger leaves. Like, I mean, when you looked at the plants in the lab and really looked at them, it jumps right out at you that the leaves are significantly larger and the plants are significantly taller. We didn't count things like number of stems or flowers, but I would imagine that those would also be traits would be more abundant in these quote resistant plants. So they were larger leaves and taller. And so here's sort of what it looks like when you line these things up side by side. So here's our resistant leaves and our susceptible leaves. So yes, I mean, I noticed here that the susceptible leaves have the defoliation on them, but when we looked at the average, even still, these are significantly smaller. And even when we removed these leaves from the analysis, they're still, like if we take these right out of the analysis and just look at the average size of the undefoliated leaves in the susceptible plants, they're significantly smaller. So we did account for that, that they're missing some parts there. Now, when we look at how the plants look in the field, this is from a field day, and here's what we would expect a susceptible plant to look like. These two plants were not part of the study. I went back to Marsh Creek at a later date and just dug these up as examples, but this is what the plants looked like that were in the study. So here's what a susceptible plant, to my eye, looked like, very spindly, not very many stems, maybe a flower or two at the end, and very thin kind of leaf canopy, if you want to say. And then here's what I would have been dug up as a resistant type plant. Super tall, big leaves, all full of flowers. So they're quite strikingly different from one another when you're in the field, when you know what to look for. Now, the next part was this defoliation. And recall that the bugs eat leaves like they're eating, sort of like how we eat corn. So once they started defoliating, they either kept defoliating or they just stopped and they sat there. So the susceptible plants on average, when they started on a leaf, they ate about 70% of that leaf. The resistant plants, when they started on a leaf, they ate about 12%. They just took a couple of bites and sat there. So they just seem to have no interest to eat those leaves. And an interesting thing about the hyperforin is that it's a large amount. So while it's the biochemical that the insect uses to seek out St. John's wort, like it can kind of smell it, I guess. So it finds St. John's wort through the hyperforin. But if the hyperforin levels are too high, then it's toxic to the Chrysalina beetle. So that's why it won't continue to eat it. Okay, so my conclusions, there appears something is going in the Marsh Creek population, something's happening, but are we seeing true genetic resistance in a population, or are we seeing this plasticity that I talked about earlier, that it's just St. John's wort is highly variable, and maybe in that population, there's just a lot of genetic or a lot of plasticity, and so we don't know if that trait is truly a genetic trait that will be passed on to offspring. So therefore, the next step would be to repeat the experiment using offspring of these plants that have been deemed to be susceptible or resistant. So new plants have been collected at Marsh Creek and they're in a greenhouse. And so that will be the next, with funding, that would be the next step. The other thing we don't know is what's the possible geographic extent. A lot of people talk about seeing St. John's wort resurging on the landscape, but it's uncertain if it's potentially linked to the biocontrol or if it's something else, like the biocontrol insects are just no longer well aligned with the plant. Remember, there's a number of things that make a good biocontrol insect, and it's potential that one of those other traits is not well, sort of like it's just not happening anymore, like the insect and the host are not well aligned. So back to the land managers, here's the field ID tools that I would really recommend you to keep your eyes peeled for. When you go into a population of St. John's wort, do you see no feeding on some of the plants while other plants are being fed upon? So that was my first sort of clue. Now, of the plants that are not fed on, are they a lot taller than the plants that are fed on? And are those unfed plants, do they have leaves that seem like really big compared to the defoliated plants? These things all have to come together. Seeing plants with no feeding and others that are fed on doesn't mean anything. That's just the way it goes. But then when you connect these other pieces into the puzzle, then you might actually have something sort of going on that's worth investigating. So unfortunately, I don't have future funding to continue this. And when I do, I'm going to be really excited to share my results. But I would like to thank the agencies that participated in the original project that happened. And with their funding, we were able to get a sort of a little look into this world of what might be happening with St. John's wort.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. I hope you get some more funding and we can come back to these Kootenays and see what's going on with our bugs. Find some. Hopefully it was a low year that year, and then when you come back, it'll be a bustling year of Chrysalina.
Yes, yeah.
Shauna, I see you have a question. We've got a couple minutes for questions. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask away?
Yeah, sorry, just trying to find the button. But yeah, my question, I don't know if you can see it in the chat, Catherine, but with St. John's wort being a perennial, is there any ability to age the plants and see if any of these trends that you're observing might correlate with the age of the plant?
Oh, yeah, you know, I don't know how to age St. John's wort. I know some plants you can like look at the roots and get some clues that way, but I don't know how to age St. John's wort. And the fact that it's a perennial actually makes it really awesome, because we can keep it alive for a long time in a greenhouse and keep, you know, crossing and back crossing the offspring. And with an annual, it's kind of hard because you just get one kick at it and then the plant is sort of done. So I don't know. I mean, I wish I could say, yes, we can do this, but I really don't know how to age a plant like St. John's wort. And then of course, there's going to be, if it is something that's genetic and it's passed on to its offspring, then almost like regardless of the age, if it has the trait for like an overabundance of hyperforin production, that will start right from the get-go. Like it's not a response to the environment. It's a genetic trait that the offspring is like inherited from its parents. So, well, that's the assumption anyways, is that it's a genetic thing. It could be something that builds up very slowly over time, but you know, we didn't see that at Wigwam. So that the results at Wigwam are kind of interesting because it makes me think, oh, it's a very slow, if it's happening, it's a very slow process within a population, because we didn't see any evidence of it at Wigwam, even though Wigwam had the same biocontrol used to work like crazy, you know, bugs were dripping off the plants, and now it seems like we have nothing. Does that help? Does that answer?
Yeah, I guess that's just another study in itself, right? If you grew out over multiple years and you watch the characteristics of the plant, you may observe trends and changes in.
Yes. Yeah. If you could do like a 10-year, let's say a 10-year study and look and see, you know, like, sure, it might be hyperforin doesn't respond like hypericin in 12 hours. Boom, hypericin levels go through the roof. It could be that hyperforin takes 3 years or 4 years for the plant to develop that. And yeah, that's a whole, I mean, that would be a whole nother really interesting study. And it would certainly support the idea that if you see St. John's wort appearing, you need to control it like ASAP, because it could be, oh, within 5 years, it will develop high levels of hyperforin. And so you need to get on it right away. And that also brings up another thing, is that I do want to say that it's not that we shouldn't be using biocontrol, but I think that we need to investigate possibly like other insects. Like if we had multiple, like we've really relied on just the one, the hypericy, and maybe we should pull some of the other ones out of the vault. 10 or 4 were tested initially, and we only went with 1. Maybe there's some opportunities to look at those other ones and see if they could be a good fit to sort of bring into production.
Definitely. The more tools we have, the better. All right. If there aren't any more questions, we're right on time for our lunch break. We'll take half an hour here. Again, if anybody showed up late, please put your name and affiliation into the chat box so we can record who was here, or just where you're from if you're just coming in as a citizen. And at 12 o'clock, we'll return for our business meeting. It's very exciting. So everyone, please come back for the AGM business portion. And after we breeze through that, we will move on to our third keynote speaker. All right. Have a great lunch, everyone.
Okay, hello. Okay. So, Katie, I think we're getting ready here to do the business meeting.
Yes, yeah. Let's just wait one more minute to see if we have some people getting some last minute bites in and refreshments.
Yeah, my soup's going to be cold by the time we're done. Okay.
And we also need Shauna on the line, and she hasn't joined yet.
Oh, I'm here.
No, Shauna Baker.
Okay, Baker. Sorry.
You have to be more specific. Yeah.
Sorry.
Just while we're waiting, I'll just do a brief overview of how this is going to work. We're going to go into our AGM business portion of the meeting. Randy is going to chair this and go through it. We are going to ask for motions and seconds. So if you will request a motion, and if you're able to motion it, please put your name into the chat box as Katie Reed motion, and then we'll ask for a seconder. And then if you could please second, you put your name in the chat box, Katie Reed second, or obviously whatever your name is. And then we'll do a poll for a vote to get consensus for approval. So the poll will automatically pop up on your screen. You just hit yes, no, abstain, we'll wait 15 seconds to make sure that everyone has voted, and then move on to the next motion. And just a quick reminder that members of EKISC are allowed to vote. So if you're not a member of EKISC, just refrain from voting and hang out to listen into everything that's going to go down. So.
Oh, good. And Shauna Baker has just entered the room. So everybody act respectable.
All right, Randy, take it away.
Okay, so what we're going to be doing now is the business meeting. This is actually required under the BC Societies Act. And it's quite a formal process, but I think we can move through it fairly quickly. This is something that we have to do every year to fulfill our obligations as a society. Now, what we're going to do here is I'm going to ask for a motion to commence the EKISC business meeting. So if you're a member of EKISC, could you please type in the chat room your name so we can actually move the motion forward? Just waiting for somebody to type into the chat box. Your name and a motion to continue to start the meeting. Anybody at all? Here, I'll show you how it's done.
Here you go, Shauna motion. Shauna
Stephanie.
motion, and then we'll use
we'll Stephanie as the second.
Perfect.
Okay, and Stephanie's pleading already. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is the first of our polls. This is something that we've actually done. We're going to be doing it this year for the first time ever. Is a bit of democracy. Usually we just wait for comments. But if you're actually in favor of this, all in favor of commencing the business meeting, please mark yes or no in the poll in front of you. I've got some abstentions. 10 people voting so far. 3 abstaining. It's like watching a very small. It's like watching a very short horse race here. Okay, and I'm going to call it. Okay, 15. Okay, we got 15 out of 30 people have voted, out of 29 have voted. So I'm going to call it there, and the ayes have it. So we have 15 out of 20 we have 11 out of 15 have voted to proceed for abstentions. So ending the poll. And there we share the results. There we go. Brad came too late for the voting. So there we go. We'll actually stop there, and now we'll start with the business meeting. And okay, so now we're commencing, and what you see before you is the business agenda, and that's where we actually adopt the business agenda, the meeting minutes from 2020. And we also have Shauna Baker in the room. She will present the financial report, which we have to have presented to the membership to agree to it. And we'll present the current board. We'll elect the members for 2021, which actually quickly becomes 2022. And then we adjourn, and we'll have one more conversation from, and we'll have another talk from Myra Jukers, who actually is applying to be on our board this year. Okay, so the next slide, could we show the business agenda, please? Okay, now again, could we adopt, now the first motion is, again, could we have motions in the chat room to adopt the agenda, please? Okay, this being the agenda that you see in front of you. Okay, Emma has moved to has motioned it, and okay, and Stephanie has seconded it. Okay, good. Now I'm actually going to do yet another one of these polls. Nope. Stop sharing. Now what we do next is, what I will do here is, this is the next question that you get to vote on. Are you in favor of adopting the EKISC 2021 voting? So far, 1 person, 5, 8, 9. Just give it a few more minutes here. You're up to about 13, 14, 15. And Okay. I'm got a few more people voting. Okay, that's 13 out of 16. And what we have here is we have 13 out of 16. We've adopted the agenda, so moved. We've adopted the agenda. Now, the next question here is two days ago on Monday. We are getting a bit of feedback here. Could you please make sure that you're muted for this part of the program, please? Yeah, if you haven't already, yeah. Okay, what we are doing here for the AGM minutes, we were sent out on Monday. Before we call any motions or seconds, is there any questions or edits? Please put them in the chat box regarding the minutes that were taken at the AGM that we held actually last in 2019, November, I believe. Any questions or edits? Nope. Okay. Okay, with that being said, could I have a motion to adopt the 2020 AGM minutes? Please type your name in the chat box with a motion. And then we'll Todd Larson. Thank you. That's a motion. Could I have a second? And Todd Larson and his other guys at Shauna. Okay, thank you, Shauna. Now, yet again, another poll. This goes quickly. Okay, could you please choose whether or not we adopt the minutes here, please? Out of 31, 1, 3, 6, 7, happening quickly, 10, 11. And, okay, so, oh, we're getting more people voting all the time. Okay, so what we have here is 13 out of 17 people have voted to adopt the 2020 minutes, so it is adopted. Okay, now to our next step are the 2020 financials. And Shauna Baker, could you actually present? Well, not quite yet. We actually have to see what the financials are. Shauna, would you actually like to present, and can you do a screen share, please, to actually go over the financials?
Can you hear me?
Hello, Shauna. Yes, we can hear you, Shauna. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Just one sec. I'm just going to do the screen share. Okay, can you see my screen for the financials?
Yep, yeah, it's right there. Thanks, Shauna.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Okay, so thanks for the invitation to present this year's, or the December 31st, 2020 financial statements for EKISC. The screen up in front of you is showing the statement of financial position, which is in essence the balance sheet. So it's comparative to the 2019 year end. So the assets of EKISC are sitting at 388,923, slightly down from the 516,383 from the previous year. And in large part, that's due to the investments. So the investments were funds that were received from Flinro and were invested, and those have now been brought into revenues into the 2020 year end. Accounts receivable are up higher a little bit from over last year, and those amounts, I believe, are have been received to date. So the amount due from the government agency, the 7856, that's just the GST that EKISC receives back from what it's paid out during the year. And of course, the inventory is approximately the same as it was in the previous fiscal. Going down to the liabilities and net assets, accrued liabilities in your accounts payable, again, roughly the same. So this includes things that are invoices that have been paid subsequent to the December 31st year end, as well as any accruals, things like my accounting fee, those would be accrued and paid out at a subsequent date. Due to government agencies, the 5615 is the corporate tax, or sorry, not corporate, the payroll source deductions. And again, those have since been paid. There were no unearned revenues this year, and this is that 226,300 from 2019, which is in large part the investment, and that's the offset to that from 2019. Deferred revenues are comprised of things that have been monies received from various funders that have been deferred into the 2021 year. And a large part of that is due to the timing of the monies received and when the contract or the project end date is. So again, those are reconciled, and those will be coming into revenues into the 2021 year. So our total liabilities and net assets is 388,923 for the December 31st, 2020 year end. Okay, I'm going to go down to the next page here, which is the statement of operations, which in its essence, again, is the income statement or profit and loss statement of EKISC. So revenues are summarized, and we can look at that in a minute. But for 2020, in comparison to the budget, and then the third line is the comparison from the prior year. Again, very much in line with what the budgeted amount was, a couple $1,000 less, so we were on target. The expenses, the administration fees, 121,101 versus the budget amount for 123.9. Again, very much in line with the expectation of where we expect the funds to be spent during the year. Herbicide, slightly less, about $9,000 less than the budgeted amount, just a little bit less required for the herbicides. Treatments, also down slightly, about $4,000 from the budgeted amount, $489,608. So that's what was spent for treatments during the year. In terms of the field work, the total field work expenses were $147,931. 158 was the budget, and a large part of that was the decrease, about $9,000 in the field project delivery wages. So just less spent in what was expected for the delivery of the project field work for wages themselves, but everything else is very much in line. Outreach programs, budgeted 44,757 compared to the 42,600 that was spent. So again, very much in target with what the expectation was. So overall, total expenses during the December 31st, 2020 year end was $25,817. So that was the excess of revenue over expenses. So that's the excess that's there. That was for funds that just weren't spent. There was originally a projected loss of $4,400. So we're definitely ahead by about $29,000 over what we originally thought that was going to happen for the fiscal year. A couple of adjustments were also required. There was the disposal of the asset, the truck. So there was a loss of $1,500 on that. And we received wage subsidy income of $5,390, and that was the funds from the government due to COVID. So the total revenues over expenses, the excess was $32,707. So in essence, that's the profit of EKISC during the 2020 year end. The revenues themselves, this is just done by funder, and you can just do a comparison to see, but everything is pretty much very much in line with what the expectation of the budgeted amount versus what was received during the year. There were also a little bit of donations and some interest income, with the total revenues for the 2020 year end of $924,736. So that line plugs back up into the revenue of Schedule 1, that 924, and the 32,707 becomes part of the net assets. So this is the accumulation over time of the change in the assets, or the net assets of EKISC. So we started off with 209,329. We add in the profit, the revenues over expenses for the current year of 32,700. and ending up with net assets at the end of the year, $242,000. So in essence, that represents the excess of all revenues over expenses for EKISC over the life of its operation. So that's it for me. Does anybody have any questions?
Questions, could you either unmute yourself or put the question in the chat box? Any questions at all for Shauna? Ooh, they all turned their cameras off. Okay, okay. Well, in that case, well, thank you, Shauna, for the introduction. Could you stop sharing screens and we'll go back to the agenda again? And I'll call for a motion to accept the financials as presented. Again, in the chat room, could I get a motion to adopt the financials as presented? Just name and motion. Okay, Stephanie motions and Myra seconds. Okay, great, thanks. And now we'll do one more poll. And yet another poll. And the question actually is, all in favor of adopting the 2020 financials as presented? And you can vote yes, no, or abstain. Okay, we're up to 15. A few more, give it a few more minutes here. Okay, we're heading 17. That's the majority of the people in the meeting. Okay, I'll end the poll and I'll share the results. The motion is carried. We have 13 out of 17 people who voted for it. And yeah, 4 abstentions. So the motion is carried. Okay, now on to the business meeting. What happens is that typically our board members are elected for a 2-year term. And some people actually stood for election last year in 2020, so they're good till 2022. So next time we have an annual general meeting, these folks will stand for election again. But Shauna Lorad, Stephanie Daniels, and Raylan Blumhagen are continuing on with their 2-year terms for this year. Shauna represents the Ministry of Forest Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Resource Development. Stephanie Daniels represents Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, and Raylan represents the Waldo Stock Breeders and Livestock Association. Shauna Vice Chair, Stephanie Treasurer, and Raylan as Secretary. So that's basically our executive. So next slide, please. And we would like to thank, during our 2021 season, we did lose one of our directors. Stephanie Nida actually represented the forest industry for us. She had been working for Canfor and agreed to sit in to represent the forest industry. But she left to work for Canfor in 2021, and she had too much work to do at her new job, and plus she had to move up the Elk Valley, so it was getting to be a long journey. I'd like to thank her for her service, because she did actually work on our contract committee as well, and we wish her the best in her new duties. And what we actually have are some others standing up for re-election. And there's an abnormally large number here. So I will be standing for 1 year just to try to even it out. We can't have the entire board turnover every year, but we've got 6 members here. Everyone else is standing for a 2-year term. They might have known that when I told them that, but they are. So Randy Harris, I'm an independent contractor. I work in the forest industry, typically under for my own consulting firm. Jamie Davies works for the Regional District of East Kootenay. Rick Taggart represents the Windermere and District Farmers Institute. And Rick Van Horn represents the BC Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And Dave Pick is our Director at Large out of Invermere. And we have a new person who's actually during the course of the year asked if she could join our board. It's Myra Jukers. And as a bit of an introduction, so, you know, we're going to ask you to vote here in a minute, so you know who you're actually looking at. Myra Jukers is a Master of Science student with the University of Saskatchewan. Her work is based on controlling the invasive plant sulfur sanctuary through goat grazing and herbicide application, with trials conducted in the Tobacco Plains Reserve. Myra is originally from Southern Ontario. She did her bachelor's degree at Trent University, after which she spent 4.5 years working at EKISC Ecological Services in Cranbrook. If got a bit of feedback there, could you mind muting yourself, please? In addition to finishing her research studies, Myra is currently working as an environmental officer for the Lands and Resource Departments at Tobacco Plains Indian Band. But Myra is officially an independent board member at large and represents ecology and integrated pest management on our board. Yes, we're pleased to have her interest in joining the board. Now, this is the group of people that we have interested in joining the board, but this being a democracy and annual general meeting, I have to ask 3 times, are there any other nominations for the board from the people present? Okay, are there any other nominations for the board for the second time? It's a great honor. You're passing it up. And for the last time, are there any other nominations for the board? Okay, with that, I close the nominations. And could I have a motion to elect the board members as presented? Please type your name in the chat box. Could we have a motion? Anybody at all? Anybody's member? Okay, Shauna Larad. And Stephanie has seconded it. Okay, with that, we get to do the, we have the board members election here. And please vote yes, no, or abstain. Okay, we're off to a flying start. Nobody's even abstaining this time. Oh, spoke too soon. So we're up to 13 votes. I'll wait a bit more. 15 votes. It's like watching the poll results on election night. Okay, so, okay, a few more. Oh, usually we get to 17 before I actually close it. One more vote. There we go. I knew somebody was out there. Okay, so there you have it. We have 17 people voting, 14 in favor, 3 abstentions, and we have no no's. So with that, the motion is carried. Okay, and now here's the exciting part of it. We now have a motion to adjourn the business meeting because we've done everything now. And so if you could actually just have a vote here, because otherwise we just have to keep sitting here in the meeting, wondering why it's going on. Oh, look, this is way faster. You know, as soon as you say, let's close the meeting, everyone voted immediately. Okay. Okay. And there we go. There we have it. We have moved to close the meeting, and almost nobody abstained from actually ending the meeting. That's actually really, really heartening. So the meeting is adjourned, and thank you all for your attention. We do have to do this as part of our duties as a society under the Act. Now, what we're doing here is we're actually going to have another keynote speaker, and Katie asked me to keep on carrying on. So what we're going to hear from is Myra Jukers, who's actually going to present elements of her master's degree. Now, to introduce her, I did this already, but I'm going to go through it again really quickly. Master's student from University of Saskatchewan, controlling invasive plant sulfur sanctuary through goat grazing and herbicide applications on Tobacco Plains Indian Band, originally from Southern Ontario, bachelor's degree in Trent University. After that, 4.5 years working in ecological services in Cranbrook. And currently, Myra is working as an environmental officer in the Lands and Resource Department of Tobacco Plains Indian Band. And Myra has just joined us as an independent member of independent member at large on our board of directors, and she will represent ecological and integrated pest management on our board. And we're actually quite interested to hear what the results from her master's thesis, because the thought being is that you make weeds small, weak, and helpless, and then keep them that way through grass seeding. So that's something we'd actually like to hear more of here in the Valley. So Myra, are you able to share screens with us? Your presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, good.
Let's see here.
Good, because then I turn off my camera and I'll go get my lunch.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. And as Randy mentioned, I am a Master of Science student with the University of Saskatchewan. My research is focused on the invasive plant sulfur cinquefoil, which is prevalent in degraded rangelands in southeastern British Columbia. For my presentation, I will be going through management strategies that I examined to control sulfur cinquefoil. I will be talking about the seed legacy of sulfur cinquefoil in degraded rangelands, and also briefly touch upon the importance of revegetation with invasive plant management. Figured it out. Okay. Okay, so rangelands in southeastern British Columbia are a critical land resource. However, since the 1930s, there's been fire suppression practices, which has led to forest encroachment onto rangelands. This has reduced available rangeland for grazers and has placed grazing pressure on unencroached rangelands by livestock and ungulates. This has led to a degradation of the rangelands and made them susceptible to invasion by invasive species such as sulfur cinquefoil. The sulfur cinquefoil is a perennial forb that is native to Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean. It was introduced to North America prior to 1900. And in Eastern North America, it is considered a weed of minor concern. However, in Western North America, particularly within the Intermountain region of the Northwestern United States and Southwestern Canada, it is considered an invasive plant of serious concern. So it invades disturbed habitats, including roadsides, abandoned fields, and clear cuts, but also invades natural sites, including grasslands, shrublands, and open forests. It can live up to 10 years, and it's also a prolific seed producer, producing on average 6,000 seeds per plant that it consistently reproduces on an annual basis. And the seeds are only distributed within 3 meters of the parent plant. However, this allows sulfur cinquefoil to form these dense continuous stands, which is shown in this photograph. So these dense continuous stands displace native vegetation and reduce the quality of the rangeland for livestock and wildlife. Now, this photo was taken on Tobacco Plains Indian Reserve, and it's just one of many examples of sulfur cinquefoil infestations on the rangelands throughout the reserve. And the fact that sulfur cinquefoil is so prevalent was a concern with the land department here. And so that inspired my research to look at management strategies to deal with sulfur cinquefoil. The primary component of my research project was a field study, and the field study examined the response of sulfur cinquefoil to goat grazing and herbicide treatments in order to control its invasion in rangelands within southeastern BC. And a smaller component of my research study, which was actually done by an honors student, Mark Rosendahl at the University of Saskatchewan, was a seed bank study. And the aim of the seed bank study was to examine the prevalence of sulfur cinquefoil and other species within the soil seed bank at varying soil depths of a degraded rangeland. So to first go over my field study. So I actually had 2 field sites. However, for this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on my field site on Tobacco Plains Indian Reserve. And for those of you who do not know, Tobacco Plains is located in the southeastern corner of BC, just along the Montana and BC state, Montana state border and BC. So as mentioned, the 2 invasive plant management strategies I looked at were target grazing and the application of herbicide. So target grazing is the use of livestock at a specific season, duration, and intensity to control invasive plants. Other research done in the States has used sheep, to manage sulfur sinkful, but for my project, I used goats to determine if they're also effective in managing sulfur sinkful, and then that provides another livestock option to choose from to deal with this invasive plant. And I also included herbicide application, as herbicide is one of the more common methods to control invasive plants. And by incorporating both of these management strategies, I was able to compare the 2 to see if one was better than the other or if similar results were observed. And for my study, the herbicide that I chose was the broadleaf herbicide Milestone, which has the active ingredient aminopyrrolate. At my Tobacco Plains field site, I had a 12-hectare area that I divided into 3 4-hectare sections, and each of these sections represented a different grazing treatment. So the first was where no grazing occurred. The second was where 1 grazing event happened, and the third was 2 grazing events. So the grazing was conducted in 2019 and 2020. The first grazing event was implemented in early June, which is when sulfur sinkful is at its budding stage. And then the grazing twice treatments were implemented, once in early June, and the second was done in early July, which is when sulfur sinkful is in the flowering and seed set stage. And to look at the impacts of herbicide, what I did is applied herbicide in 8 6-meter squared plots within each of these grazing treatments. So this allowed me to look at herbicide just on its own as a management strategy, but also herbicide in combination with the grazing treatments to examine whether an integrated approach was more effective at managing sulfur sinkful in comparison to grazing just on its own or herbicide just on its own. And for this study, I only applied herbicide once in mid-July of 2019. So data was collected in late May and late July in 2019 and 2020, which was before and after treatments were implemented. And for this presentation, I will be highlighting results on the treatment effects on sulfur sinkful biomass and number of seed heads. So this figure shows the effects of the grazing and herbicide treatments on sulfur sinkful biomass, with the treatments on the x-axis and then biomass on the y-axis. So first, I'd like to bring your attention to just the grazing treatments. We can see in both July 2019 and July 2020, which was after the grazing treatments occurred, there was a significant reduction in sulfur sinkful biomass following grazing once and grazing twice. Now, there was no significant differences between the 2 grazing treatments in regards to the declines in sulfur sinkful biomass. What we did find is that after the first graze in 2019, there was a 73% reduction in biomass. And then in 2020, there was a 62%. And then in both years, after 2 grazing events, we see a 93% reduction in sulfur sinkful biomass. Now, in 2019, we did not see a herbicide effect. And the reason for this was herbicide was applied just a week before data was collected, which wasn't enough time for the herbicide to really take effect and impact sulfur sinkful. And then the reductions that we see in the grazing once and twice plus herbicide treatments were in response to the grazing and not the herbicide. In 2020 is when we see the herbicide effects. So when the data was collected, it was just less than a year after the herbicide was applied. And here we saw that biomass was reduced by 87 to 99% in the herbicide treatments in comparison to the control, suggesting that a legacy of herbicide legacy effect was achieved after approximately a year of herbicide being applied. Now, with the goat grazing and just the goat grazing treatments, we did not see any significant differences in sulfur sink flow biomass in comparison to the control, suggesting that a year after the grazing was implemented, a legacy effect was not achieved. Then in July 2020, we continued to see the effects of herbicide with a 96 to 99% reduction in sulfur sink flow biomass. What's also interesting is that the herbicide treatments, the reduction in biomass did not significantly differ from the grazing twice treatment. Another interesting point is that between the 3 different herbicide treatments, there were no significant differences in the reduction in biomass. So herbicide applied just on its own effectively suppressed sulfur sink flow growth in comparison to the integrated approaches. So this suggests that at this study site, grazing and herbicide approach is not needed to manage sulfur sink foil. Now, this figure shows the effects of the different treatments on the number of sulfur sink foil seed heads. So again, just to start with the grazing treatments, we see that in both 2019 and 2020, there's a significant reduction in number of sulfur sink foil seed heads following grazing once and grazing twice, with no significant differences between the 2 grazing treatments. Following grazing once, there was an 85% reduction in number of seed heads in 2019 and a 65% reduction in 2020. And then following 2 grazing events in 2019, there was a 99% reduction in seed heads, and in 2020, an 89% reduction. Again, in July 2019, a herbicide effect was not observed. And this was, as mentioned, because data was just collected a week after the herbicide was applied. And then the reductions that we see in the grazing once plus herbicide and grazing twice plus herbicide treatments were in response to the grazing itself. So here in 2020, we see the herbicide effects. So in the herbicide treatments, there was a 96 to 100% reduction in sulfur sink foil seed heads, which was significant in comparison to the number that remained in the control plots. And there were no differences in the reduction in sulfur sink foil seed heads between the herbicide treatments and the grazing treatments on their own. And again, we see that herbicide on its own did not significantly differ from the integrated approaches, suggesting that to reduce sulfur sink foil reproduction, herbicide can be applied on its own without needing to have an integrated grazing and herbicide approach. So the key finding from my field study is both the application of milestone and goat grazing can effectively reduce sulfur sink foil growth and seed production, providing land managers with 2 options to deal with sulfur sink foil. Now to switch gears and look at the soil seed bank study. So this was conducted in late August of 2018 on Tobacco Plains. So we had 3 sampling locations within rangelands that were infested with sulfur sink foil. And at each of these sampling locations, we selected 3 spots where soil was collected at 0 to 5 centimeters, 5 to 10 centimeters, and 10 to 15 centimeters. And the reason for collecting at these different depths was for us to examine the difference in potentially species composition between those depths, and then also to see if the number of germinated seeds declined with soil depth. And the soil samples were taken to the greenhouse, where there were 3 germination stratification cycles conducted to identify the species and also number of germinated seeds. So from this, from the seed bank, we actually only identified 9 species. So in comparison to the above ground plant community, it was quite poor in species richness. Of the 9 species, 7 were non-native. The species that dominated was shepherd's purse, and it represented 19% of the seed bank, followed by Canada bluegrass, which represented 16%, and then sulfur cinquefoil, which represented 13% of the seed bank. The only native species that were identified were pink twink and Idaho fescue, which represented less than 2% of the seed bank. Now looking at how number of germinated seeds changed with depth, with specifically looking at sulfur cinquefoil, we found that at 0 to 5 centimeter soil depth, the number of germinated seeds was significantly higher in comparison to the 10 to 15 centimeter soil depth. So between the two depths, there was a reduction in 69% reduction in germinated seeds. And then for the other categories, we lumped the non-native forbs into one category, and same with non-native grasses, native forbs and grasses. And with this, we did not find any significant differences in number of germinated seeds with soil depth. So it was only observed with sulfur cinquefoil. So the key finding from the soil seed bank study is, although sulfur cinquefoil, the number of germinated seeds was reduced with depth, the fact that it was present, throughout from 0 to 15 centimeters suggests that there is a legacy being maintained. And also other non-native species are maintaining a seed bank legacy. And there is a poor representation of native species within the seed bank, suggesting that the seed bank is degraded. So to bring all of these kind of results and ideas together for the management implications to recover rangelands. If your rangeland is invaded with sulfur cinquefoil, there are two management options. Herbicide, specifically Milestone, is able to effectively suppress sulfur cinquefoil growth and reproduction, as well as goat grazing. So these options give land managers a choice, and their choice can depend on different factors such as social and cultural values, proximity to sensitive areas such as water bodies, and then also specifically in this area, there is the risk of disease transmission between domestic goats and bighorn sheep and mountain goats. And so that needs to be taken into consideration when you're managing sulfur cinquefoil on a site. What also needs to be taken into consideration is the seed bank. So following the management of sulfur cinquefoil through herbicide or goat grazing, niches or open spaces in the plant community are created. And if your seed bank is dominated by native species, then they will be able to invade those open spaces. However, as we saw with on Tobacco Plains, the seed bank is dominated by non-native species. So there's the risk of these open spaces either being reinvaded by sulfur cinquefoil or other non-native species taking over and invading. And what, for example, of growing concern in this area is cheatgrass, which wasn't super dominant in the seed bank, but it was present in the seed bank for my study. So that is a concern. And that brings us to the point of active revegetation. If your seed bank is degraded, active revegetation is, in my opinion, very important to help prevent sulfur cinquefoil from reinvading or other invasive plants from invading those open spaces that were created. And this is necessary to help improve the health of these degraded rangelands so that they can better support livestock and wildlife as well. And that is essentially it. A bit of a quick presentation, but yeah, I hope you thought it was interesting. So thank you for the opportunity and for listening.
Thanks, Myra. Definitely very interesting to see the different options as well as what Tobacco Plains is dealing with and how to take that. I think a lot of people are dealing with sulfur cinquefoil and species and how to best manage that efficiently. So yeah, very interesting. Does anybody have any follow-up questions or anything for Myra? Oh, there is a question from Jane in the chat box. She says, for your seed bank study, what methods did you use to get your seedlings to a size where you could identify them to species? Jane is running a seed bank study right now and having some difficulty identifying some of the grasses and forbs.
Yes, no, definitely. So what we did is so basically every week the germinates were counted, and for anyone that were unable to identify, we essentially transplanted them and just let them grow so that we could better identify them. So in the time being, they were just noted as, we just gave them kind of like a code, or for example, like fuzzy plant or something like that. And then once it was able to grow up and we could better identify it, then we were putting the actual name to that plant.
All right. There's another question here from Stephanie Daniels, and she is asking, is there any plans to continue with some of the monitoring of the sites you performed the study on?
At the one site, so the two sites that I had were at Wycliffe and Tobacco Plains. The Wycliffe one was on private property, and the owner was nice enough to let me do my study there for 2 years, but I had to take down my study, so I'll be unable to monitor at that spot. But Tobacco Plains, we still have the plots there. Yeah, monitoring is definitely something that I'd like to continue and work on. And also I really would like to try and figure out, not just focusing on the grazing and herbicide application, but incorporate that revegetation element to it. And monitoring would be critical for that process.
Yeah, I think that's long-term monitoring of any kind of invasive plant research and management strategies is needed out there, and to pass on that information. Yeah, it's very exciting, especially if you do the revegetation. That's one thing that we always think about is herbicide or mechanical treatments of any sort enough, and revegetation and how to bring that into our day-to-day invasive plant management strategies.
For sure. I see a question from Emma. Well, okay, so yes, with the, I wouldn't necessarily say that there was like a greater impact of just the herbicide in comparison to the grazing and herbicide together. Like the error bars were using standard error as opposed to standard deviation. So if you look at that, there is like, if I were to use standard deviation, there'd be more variability between the two. So I'd say that they were pretty similar, and rather than just like the herbicide having a greater effect in comparison to that integrated approach, it kind of was more of a, I guess, a sampling factor than anything, I would say, for that. I hope that answers it, Emma.
All right, if there's no further, oh, didn't know.
I have one question, Miss Myra.
Yes.
Do you recall any of the jingles that the goats taught you while you were great?
No, but they are on Facebook.
Well, how about
if you want to see that?
Clarence and the Gumsoo.
Yes, no, Kaylee was our goat grazer, and we had a blast just well, basically having the goats out there and fooling around. So I was really appreciative to have her involved in this research project.
Yeah, there's a lot of time spent on the land when you're doing all that work, isn't there, Myra?
Yes, most definitely. Yeah, and it's fun to do it with goats.
Yeah. Yeah, it brings a lot of joy to the land. I better get Diamond in here. She's already licking her chops to get this hay. Okay.
Thanks for listening, Kaylee.
Bye for now. Oh, Todd, the concert. Oh, anytime you guys call a date, we'll put on a concert. Winter in Willow. Willow in winter.
I love it. That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, great. We can wrap up the speedy sessions, and we will just take a very quick 10-minute break. And then when we wrap up the keynote speakers, quick 10-minute break for everyone to regroup and stretch your legs one more time. And then we will come into our speedy sessions. Everyone come enthusiastic and ready to ask questions for our speedy session presenters. And then our Golden Shovel Award, and then we'll close things up. So we will see everyone in 10 minutes at 1:01. How's that sound? Great. Bye. All right. Thanks, Kaylee, for the intermission entertainment. That was a cute video of or live video, I guess, of your goats. Looks like they're happy and healthy and enjoying the sun. All right. So now we are going to start in with our speedy sessions. This is more of a informal presentation from, we have 3 speedy sessions. We had 4, but unfortunately one dropped out at the last minute this morning. So it's an informal discussion that we're going to have with 3 presenters: Mark Trudeau from the Rocky Mountain Trench Society, Jamie Davies with the RDEK, and Megan Evans with the Alberta Invasive Species Council. And they're going to highlight a particular project or program they're involved with that manages invasive species. So we definitely encourage you to write questions in the chat box, or once they're done presenting, just informal discussion, questions and answers about their program. So let me just share. Nope, there we go. Okay. All right. So let's start with Mark with the Rocky Mountain Trench Society.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. Yeah. So I was asked, obviously, help out with the speedy session here, and I just thought I would basically take a few minutes to let everybody know sort of how the Trench Society has been approaching invasive plant management in the ER program. And so I sort of have like kind of a quick list of about 15 things that we typically are looking at and strategies that we're using. So one of the things obviously we start off with is essentially we'll be providing usually a polygon to, for example, the East Kootenay Invasive Species Council to complete an inventory on. So that kind of gives us an idea of more detailed information on that area that we want to possibly do some work. The next thing that we often do is we're obviously going to hire, let's say, a contractor to develop a prescription and some layout. And what we do is we try to work with the contractor to ensure that they're kind of putting that invasive lens on when they're out there doing the work. So we want them to sort of capture what they're seeing out in the field and possibly incorporate some of those decision-making opportunities while they're out there in the field. Obviously, if they're seeing large areas of, let's say, spotted knapweed or sulfur cinquefoil, we want that to sort of be captured in the prescription as well in their mapping, but also maybe in the layout itself to not include it because it may not be favorable for the work that we want to do there. Then, of course, after the inventory has been completed from EKISC, if it's all possible, we can follow up with chemical treatment that same season. If not, it'll be something that will be built into the following work plan for the following season. Then something that we think about, or maybe not, some people should consider, is if you're going to be applying for grants to, let's say, implement a project in an area, certainly make sure you build into that grant funding to deal with your invasive plants. It's just and most funders out there are sort of expecting that nowadays. They recognize that that's just a key integral part of implementing these projects. If you're looking to include alternative treatments, or you are planning to use some seeding, for example, just ensure that you're consulting the seed mix with the land managers that you're working with. If it's on Crown land, ensure obviously you're working with them, and ensure that basically whatever seed mix you do end up purchasing, it's a weed-free seed, and you can get that certificate usually from your supplier. The other thing to consider about with seeding, again, if you're planning on something, again, on a large scale, especially if it's on Crown land, there are some authorizations you'll need to go through. So you would need to essentially consider getting a Section 51. This is applied through basically through Front Counter BC. And again, it would probably be just a good thing to basically get in touch with the land manager to see if that is needed. Let's see. The other thing to think about is, now if you're going to hire contractors to actually implement work on the ground, maybe consider building in some language in that contract to ensure that you have invasive plant preventative measures put in place, essentially. So encourage them to ensure that they come to work with equipment that's weed free and clean. And this could be also captured in a pre-work with these individuals. If they show up with a machine that's full of mud and dirtiness, you may consider sending them back and cleaning that clean before bringing them on site again. So these are some of the things that we're thinking about when we're out there. Of course, if you are using heavy machinery, or you're, let's say, doing a bunch of burning of small piles, you're still creating some soil disturbance. It'd be a good idea to basically consider using seed to revegetate those areas as soon as possible. And so that's a matter of essentially, again, securing that seed mix, making sure it's appropriate with the land manager, and providing that to the contractor so they have it on site and it's available. Something else that we're considering more and more is implementing long-term vegetative monitoring plots into these areas that we want to do work, just because, as we know, vegetation, things change over time, and it would just be good to capture that pre-treatment and have that baseline vegetative data for long-term monitoring. The other piece for us that's important is any area where we're doing some work, we want to basically ensure that it's presented at the MAP meeting, which we have, it's an annual thing at the Forest District here in the fall. And that just basically allows for many processes coming down the road to be kind of possible. In other words, First Nations consultation will have to be completed. If these sort of things are done, then you can maybe be able to implement your project. So just making sure you get that project area into your MAP meeting. Also, if you are planning on doing any prescribed burning, we had a great presentation there earlier today from Jane. And then just last year, I believe the province just released a best management practices for prescribed fires and invasive plants. So if you have access to that document, it's a really good document to help you guide the steps needed to implement that kind of treatment. And finally, just look for opportunities to collaborate. Oftentimes, if you are working in an area, perhaps you are going to be overlapping with somebody else. And if there's an opportunity to work with another stakeholder to implement a better management plan for invasive plants, then I say go for it. And you might be able to reduce some of your costs there. So, but anyways, that's sort of in a nutshell, sort of how the Trench Society has been managing invasive plants. It's a very extensive set of steps we take here, but and it's evolving. But anyways, thanks.
Thanks, Mark. All right, does anybody have any questions about the way the Trench Society manages invasive plants, or just anything about their program right now? If you do, you can unmute yourself instead of going to the chat box, and we can just have a discussion. Or if you think about it, we can go on to the next speedy session and discuss it anytime, as this is a informal discussion. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Good questions.
Oh,
thanks, Katie.
I have a quick question. What's your success been like obtaining seed for your projects? Because I know like getting seed can be a challenge as well.
Mm-hmm.
So far, it hasn't been really an issue for us. We've been, it depends. I realize I've heard more recently, it's been more of a challenge, just speaking with some of the folks at, for example, Interior Seed and Fertilizer. But historically, we haven't had that issue. And we do have a bit of a stockpile. So we have some stuff that we're still working with. So, but moving forward, yeah, it's a good question, Myra. I'm not sure how that availability will be. But as you know, depending on the species that you're looking for, sometimes could be challenging in getting that type of plant or that type of seed if you want.
Yeah, it kind of fluctuates depending on what the source is, how that crop did or something like that, for example.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We've dealt with out of Vancouver as well. Premier Seed was another sort of larger kind of contractor, and they were pretty good as well as far as just their prices, and their distribution was really good too. So there are a few. Those are the only two that I know at this time, but it might be worth looking into those guys.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
No problem.
Do you ever have any issues when you're asking for weed-free seed? Do some suppliers have issues with verifying that they are 100% weed-free, or how does that process go?
I haven't had a problem with that as far as when I request it. It just kind of comes with the proposal oftentimes with the project. So they've been pretty good at supplying that. And it's a certificate that actually identifies where the seed came from and sort of an analysis of how it's obtained as a seed weed-free. But I've never gone further than that with it as far as confirming if that certificate is accurate.
No, that's great. That's great that we have the ability to ask for this certificate now, as opposed to before when you really weren't very sure what was coming. So
you betcha.
All right, let's move on to our next speedy session with Jamie Davies with the Regional District of the East Kootenay. Hey, Jamie.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How's it going?
Good. Can I share my screen?
Definitely.
Let me know if you're seeing it.
Not yet. There we go. Perfect.
Okay. Just gonna make sure this is gonna work. Oh, yep. Okay, so I'll get started. My name is Jamie Davies with the Regional District of East Kootenay. I'm the Recreation and Control Services Supervisor. So just a bit of a background of what I do here. I manage a small airport north of Sparwood. I manage the mosquito control program in the Wassa-Tida Creek Skookumchuck area. I oversee and supervise staff at our parks. And I also manage the invasive plant control program, and as part of that, I am the appointed weed control officer for the RDEK. So I will get into my presentation that describes a little bit of what the RDEK invasive plant program is all about. There's two parts. So the first part is the Neighborhood Invasive Plant Program. We've had this program in place since 2010. This program provides landowners with the guidance, resources, and in some cases, financial support to manage priority invasive plants on their lands. However, it is not intended to fund property owners' ongoing obligation to control invasive plants as required under the Provincial Weed Control Act. Now, if anybody wants to apply, you can find application forms on the RDEK website and at the Cranbrook office. This program has 5 options. There's the sprayer loan out program or option, where anyone can come down to the office, pick up a backpack sprayer. They can loan it out for 2 weeks at a time, and you can treat invasives on your land. We also have 3 rebates. The first rebate is a new invader rebate, where landowners can apply to have 100% reimbursed for the cost to treat invasive plants on private land or to purchase herbicide on their own. There's also a cost share rebate. So landowners that have priority invasive plant species can apply to be reimbursed 50% of the treatment costs from hiring a contractor up to a maximum of 500. So if you spend 1,000, I can give you 500. Herbicide rebate, similar with the cost share. If you spend up to 1,000, I can give you 500. And this is if you purchase herbicide. And finally, we have guidance and resources. So all landowners are eligible to receive a free site inspection and invasive plant management plan. Now, species ID booklets and reference materials are also provided during the site visit. And this is offered annually to all applicants, which of course depends on the availability of myself, the RDEK invasive plant control officer. Now, it's important to note that all rebates are offered to new applicants for the initial year of treatment. So the other side of our program is invasive plant enforcement. That started in 2017 and continues today. It started with the RDEK board adopting invasive plant regulation bylaw number 2711. And what this does is it provides guidelines to enforce invasive plants through remedial action as per the Provincial Weed Control Act. Now, except where urgency does not allow, resolution of violations through voluntary compliance using education is a primary enforcement objective. So when I'm on site, this is how I approach all landowners. We certainly don't want to escalate things to remedial action, and so we always approach with education first. Also, as part of this process, is invasive plant control officers have to be appointed to enforce the act. So the RDK board appointed 2 of them. I am one of them. The environmental manager is the other one. And so these are appointed to enforce and administer the Weed Control Act on all privately owned lands in the RDK, which includes private lands within municipalities. However, this does not include jurisdiction on municipal owned lands or provincial land or right-of-ways such as Crown land and highways. And finally, the RDK developed and adopted an invasive plant enforcement policy and procedures. This is used as a tool to help guide RDK staff and the public through management of invasive plants. And this uses EKISC priority species, their IPMAs, and prioritizes sites based on species and the size of infestations. So how does enforcement work? It is complaint-based. I don't have time to drive around and look for sites. So when I receive a complaint, which can be found, the form can be found at our office or on our RDK website. The complaint finds its way to me, and then I'll complete a site inspection, which typically happens in the late summer and or fall. Once the site's inspected, an enforcement correspondence is issued. And what that is it's a letter or a warning letter for high priority sites. And that is issued in the spring, requesting a management plan and control of the invasive plant species by a set date. So if it's sent out in the middle of May, you might have 30 days to the middle of June to provide the management plan and initiate control. Now, if control is not initiated and if the plan is not received, then we have to issue a notice. Through a warrant, so if voluntary compliance is not achieved through warning, a notice, as per the Weed Control Act, is issued requesting control of the species by a set date. So again, it would the notice would be mailed out. We would, depending on the severity or if time is of the essence, it might be 2 weeks, might be 30 days. I always try to get in touch with the landowner first to find out what's going on and to give them some time. And if that doesn't work, if voluntary compliance is still not achieved through a notice, then the RDK may initiate remedial action as per the Weed Control Act by hiring a contractor to enter the property and control regulated invasive plant species. Associated costs are issued to the property owner and their taxes, and will go to their property taxes if not paid at the end of the year. So just to give everybody a sense of what the jurisdictions are, private land versus Crown land, approximately 30% of land is privately owned in the RDK. And this image here with the purple shows where that private land is. And approximately 70% is Crown land. And that's my quick, brief RDK invasive plant program. Any questions?
More of a comment, Jamie. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
The day that you met up with me and Ryan there at the ski hill, the effect that you left on Ryan was great. He was very encouraged that you came up to speak with him, to speak with us, and encouraged about their progress on their weed control there at the ski hill. So just so you know what goes on after you leave when you meet with people, you have a great effect on people. So thanks.
Thank you, Kaylee. I appreciate that. And, thanks for bringing that up, because the ski hill is a really good example of a site that is, it's not a high priority site because there is so much knapweed and it is so spread out. I've asked them to focus on containment there and then just, pick at it from year to year and work at the center of that infestation. And that's where you come into play too with the goats, which is excellent.
Yeah, he said he had been communicating with you over email for several years, and then when he actually got to meet you and speak with you, it made quite an effect. He was quite encouraged and excited about it. So
thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions about the neighborhood invasive plant program? I really like the, I just really like the approach that Jamie takes. Like, they really don't want to do the remedial action, but the education first, and giving landowners every opportunity to ask questions or assistance with how to manage their invasive plants, and really an educational program rather than an enforcement program is what I see. And it's great. It's great to have that that program in the East Kootenays available to us. Even the Invasive Species Council to utilize that for another outreach tool on private land. Emma, was that Emma? Did you have a?
Yeah, I have a question for you. Thanks for the overview on your program. I was just wondering what sort of coordination goes into landowners whose property abut sort of public lands that are under different jurisdictions, and if the sources of the weeds are actually coming from those public lands, like right-of-ways, and what sort of coordination happens, and the landowners, how they can know that if they're treating the weeds on their land, that they're also then going to be treated on those public lands.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. That's a good question. So when I meet with landowners, and if they have invasives coming off the highways or from crown land, I always encourage them to reach out to EKISC, and I also reach out to EKISC and forward them that complaint, if you will, or that information.
Great, thank you.
Still muted, talking away. Great. Any other questions for Jamie or about the neighborhood invasive plant program? Great. If you have any questions, again, this is an informal discussion, so you can put them in the chat box, and we can talk about them later as well. Next, we are going to talk with Megan Evans with the Invasive Species Council of Alberta. Megan, how's it going?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Good. I can't seem to start my video, but that's probably fine. Oh, sorry.
Hey.
Hi. Hi, Katie. It's been a long time. Good to see you.
I know, it's been forever. Anyway.
I know. Here we go, guys. So I'm super excited. So how long? Let me start a timer. How long do I have, Katie?
You have generally like 10 minutes, and then hopefully 5 minutes for a discussion, but we can, as I said, it's kind of an informal discussion, so shorter or a little longer is not a huge issue. So.
Okay, well, my plan is to just talk really fast because we've got lots to cover, but thanks for the invitation to be here. Today, I'm going to talk to you about some new programs that we have in Alberta, and the two main programs are our Squeal on Pigs program and our Certified Weed-Free Forage program. So before I jump into that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Alberta Invasive Species Council. So we're structured quite a bit differently than you folks in BC, but we are a nonprofit organization as well, established in 2006. We have a large board of directors that come from a variety of backgrounds. So that is folks from industry, academia, all levels of government, and other NGOs as well. The whole organization has 2 full-time staff, which is quite a difference from the regional districts as well as the ISCBC organization. So we're much smaller. And our funding comes from a variety of sources. So much like many other nonprofits, we kind of ride that funding roller coaster. But our overall goal and objectives are really kind of fall into these 4 categories. So we aim to increase awareness of different invasive species in Alberta, to serve as a respected source of credible and reliable information. We do want to be the go-to, the one-stop shop for all invasive species information in the province. We work to foster partnerships. As we all know, invasive species are a transboundary issue. They have no respect for boundaries and property lines and that sort of thing. So we really need to work together to be effective. And then finally, we also work to engage and empower Albertans to prevent, detect, and take action. against invasive species. So that is what we do. So again, I'm just going to jump right into the program. So the first program is the Alberta Certified Weed-Free Forage Program. So I'll start right off by talking about why we need this, why this is something that's important. So invasive species are a threat to the environment and our economy. And we all know that. They pose major risk. They're the second leading risk of biodiversity loss after, I'm saying that all wrong. They're a major risk to biodiversity, and they come with major economic impacts. So we know that prevention is key. So an ounce of prevention is worth, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I'm all over the place here today. But yeah, we really know that the single best way of managing invasive species is to prevent them from establishing in the first place. That's what it really comes down to. And we also know that invasive species can be spread through contaminated forage. And we have all kinds. We had a terrible drought year, and we're really grateful to have had a bunch of forage come up from the East Coast. But we probably didn't get their best forage, and it'll be really interesting to see what pops up in the next few years that may have traveled as contaminants in forage that was transferred across Canada this past year. We also know that there's a demand for this certified weed-free forage product as well. We know that our national parks, provincial parks, and public land all require this, but they have a really hard time sourcing it. So that's where we really kind of come into play. So this is a program that is overseen or was initiated by NASMA. So NASMA is the North American Invasive Species Management Association. And that's the organization that sets the standards and comes up with the criteria and kind of oversees the entire program. So this is the map of all participating jurisdictions within North America. You can see Alberta's a little bit lonely here on this map of Canada. And this is a great program, and I would definitely encourage folks in BC to maybe consider this as well. But this is the level of participation that we see across North America. The other thing is that because this is a North American-wide organization that oversees the standards, the certification is recognized across North America as well. So, this is recognized across Canada and the US. So in Alberta, this is not a new program. We originally signed on to this program in the year 2000. So it's been operating for 21 years, but albeit with variable and very low uptake throughout the years. And until recently, there was only a few counties participating in the program with a few inspections each year. So that's kind of where we came in. So how the program works is weed inspectors, which are typically going to be county staff, are trained to be weed-free forage inspectors. So we can only train up people to be certified weed-free forage inspectors that have authority under Alberta's Weed Control Act. So that means that it's typically only county weed inspectors that are going to be eligible. And that's a NASMA requirement. And the county must be willing to offer the service. So it's voluntary county by county. And then the producers would contact the county to go ahead and schedule an inspection. So the inspection has to be conducted within 10 days of harvest. Storage areas must also be inspected, and there's quite a few rules kind of governing how these inspections are done. But I've got kind of a diagram here showing you how it works. That the inspector basically just works the perimeter of the field, inventories all the species that they find, and does a nice survey. So hopefully they're not going to catch anything. They'll catch any major issues. So all or portions of a field can be certified. So no one has a perfectly weed-free field. That doesn't actually exist, right? So that's why the inspectors have the authority to, to tape off certain portions of the field that don't certify. And then of course you can have weeds present, but there can be no propagated parts. So no seeds, no even flower buds, and certainly no stolons or anything like that. And the list of species that they're looking for are all of the rated species listed on the Alberta Weed Control Act, as well as all of the species on the NASMA list. So it's a fairly robust list. Once the inspection's been done, the forage has to be cut within 10 days, and it's baled with uniquely colored twine, this purple and yellow twine, and a certificate is issued. And it must be stored and transported separately from non-certified weed-free forage as well. It's a really important part of this. So initially, this program wasn't really, it didn't really take off, and we identified a bunch of barriers to success in the early days. So we identified that it was difficult for producers and buyers to get information on the program. So there was no central hub, no website, no go-to for information. And because of that, there was a major disconnect between the people selling the forage and the people who wanted to buy it. We also identified that producers weren't getting a higher price for their value-added product, and that inspections are time-consuming, and so not all municipalities have the resources or are going to be keen to offer this service. We also identified that the twine that they were using wasn't necessarily the best product for indicating it was weed-free, and that maybe we need to look at the netting or tags or things like that. So those are all some things that we identified as reasons why this program never took off. So we committed to kind of basically dealing with all of those things. So we have a page on our website dedicated to the program. We maintain a list of weed-free forage producers that have an inventory to sell. We promote the weed-free forage program to buyers and sellers. We coordinate the training for inspectors. We work with municipalities to customize the program. And we do all sorts of other things as well. So in 2021, our results, it was a terrible year to launch a new weed-free forage program because it was such a huge drought year in Alberta. So we do have some successes to celebrate those. So we did train up 45 weed-free forage inspectors. We now have 11 counties that will offer the inspections as opposed to 3. And we really hope that number is going to at least double this year. But we only had 3 inspections for 2 different inspectors or 2 different producers and 112 acres certified. But we're hopeful some of those numbers will increase in years to come. Okay, I'm going to switch gears really quick. We're going to talk about squeal on pigs. So this is an issue all across Canada. And this is a major issue in the prairies. So Saskatchewan's our epicenter with these pigs, but we have an issue here in Alberta as well. We've just launched this campaign encouraging Albertans to squeal on pigs, and we're pretty excited about creating some awareness. So a bit of background, these animals, wild boar, were introduced to the Canadian prairies for wild boar meat on farms in the 80s. Since then, they've escaped or were released. And they're considered a pest only when they are at large. So it's totally legal to farm these things. It's just when they're roaming at large, they're considered a pest under our legislation, which is a bit of, it just shows that the legislation is a bit dated. We really maybe need to work on banning the farms as well, but that's a story for another day. So these animals are incredibly damaging. They're considered to be the most damaging invasive mammal in the world, and they're really problematic. We used to encourage hunting, and we had a provincial bounty program, but that's since ended because we, at the beginning of the program, we're now at the end of it, and we have more problems with wild boar at large than we did at the beginning, and it's just not effective for a number of different reasons. So we know that awareness is needed, and even before we started the program, we were kind of aware of this. And before we did any promotion of this program, we did a pre-program survey, which really gave us, some numbers. We were able to empirically evaluate the amount of awareness that was needed, and it's a lot. So by and large, Albertans are not aware that wild boar at large are present, and those that are aware are really keen to hunt them. But as I mentioned, hunting is not effective in controlling their populations. And that's because they live in groups. And if you go hunt off 1 or 2 members of the group, the remaining pigs learn to avoid hunting. They're really, really smart animals. They will pass that information off to their offspring, and they won't be hunted again. So we know that hunting can actually make the problem worse. Our focus now is on eradication. And we are very proud, loud and proud to say that we have an eradication program in Alberta. So we have a team, and it's a collaboration between the provincial government and Alberta Wort, which is an industry group, and they're working to track and trap entire groups of pigs and remove them from the landscape. So they track them using trail cameras and drones and reports from the public. Then they set up these corral traps, which they can remotely monitor. They wait until all the pigs are inside, and then they close the door, and then we remove the entire group. So this is how we can have an actual impact on their populations, and we're really excited. So right now, this is a 3-year pilot, but we look forward to this continuing well into the future. So our role for AISC, we are promoting this. We need all Albertans to be aware that these wild boar at large are a major issue. So we drafted a press release. We did a bunch of radio interviews, print, digital, paper articles, social media boosting, all that kind of stuff. Our first billboard just went up, which was a pretty big deal. I just got that photo this week. We're really excited about that. And we've got rack card stickers, tons of t-shirts and hats as well. So lots of really exciting stuff happening there to increase that awareness. This is our core messaging. You'll see this everywhere. So we want people to know that they're incredibly damaging. Hunting is not an effective control option. And we want people to report signs and sightings of wild boar at large. And we've given them all kinds of different ways to do that. So with that, I'm not sure I did for time, but there we go. That's what I've got for you. We've got all kinds of other information on our website as well.
Thanks, Megan. Two very interesting topics. Let's open it up to discussion. Does anybody have any questions for Megan?
Hi, Megan. It's Emma. Thank you for the presentation. Really interesting. I'm wondering, because the sponsor or the support from Alberta Pork, is that because of possibility for disease transfer, or what are the risks there?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a risk assessment done in Alberta a couple of years ago now, and they identified all the issues, and the issues are vast. So like they'll turn over crops, they'll root or wallow in riparian areas, contaminate water bodies, they'll predate the livestock, they'll get into stored feed. But the major issue and risk associated with this thing, the number one risk is, just as you suggested, is the possibility of disease transfer. So they're host up to like 87 or 89 different diseases that can be spread to humans, livestock, and wildlife. Some of those are reportable diseases. So foot and mouth disease, that's a terrifying term to a lot of producers, and African swine fever as well. So those diseases, a confirmed outbreak would cause the complete and immediate closure of Alberta pork exports, and in some cases, Alberta beef exports as well. And it's bad enough if you get an outbreak in a confined facility. You can deal with that through culling and biosecurity. But if you get an outbreak in a feral population that we can't get a handle on, I mean, that would absolutely be devastating. You know, there would be no timelines on when we recover from that. So Alberta pork and Alberta beef producers are very engaged and very involved in this program, because they're you know, it's in their best interest to make sure that we get this problem under control. Great question.
And how if this epicenter is from Saskatchewan, are you mimicking you know, methods that they're using, or is it different, or how is that?
Yeah, so Saskatchewan, there's no coordinated control efforts in Saskatchewan. So they just promote hunting. And in the lack of an active management program, hunting is probably not a terrible idea. But yeah, Saskatchewan, I think, has like, you know, 80 or 90% of the wild boar that are feral, so feral pigs in Canada. And then the rest are spread out between Manitoba and Alberta. There's a few, we get some reports in BC as well, largely from domestic hogs that have escaped, has been my understanding anyway, and some in Ontario. But Alberta is the only province with a coordinated management program, this eradication program. And everybody in Canada, all of the northern United States, we all need to get Saskatchewan on board to start taking coordinated strategic action to get these things under control, because otherwise we're going to have an ever-present source of them, you know, basically. And it wouldn't surprise me, these pigs, I mean, they can survive anywhere in Canada pretty much, and it wouldn't surprise me if they can eventually make their way across the Rockies too.
Yeah, eradication seems pretty difficult when those borders, those invisible borders, are not collaborating or on the same page, for sure.
Totally, yeah, absolutely.
We have a question in the chat box from Lindsay. What message is being provided to those producers still raising wild boar, and is there pressure to end this practice?
So yeah, I mean, this is a huge gap, right? So the regulations are behind management practices, right? And that's a big problem. And I'm sure you all know how long it takes to change regulations and stuff. So, I mean, I think our messaging has to be clear, but they have been able to change the containment standards for all wild boar farms in Alberta. They have to adhere to new, more robust and more strict containment guidelines. And those facilities are all inspected annually as well. So that's at least a step in the right direction. There have been some counties that have implemented county level bylaws that prohibit any new wild boar farms. But it's definitely an issue as well, because there's another source of them, and they're hard to contain, right? They're just incredibly smart. So.
And sorry, I just missed a question from Leanne and Jordy. What is their meat used for when they are full of the pigs, or what is their meat used for?
When it's farmed or when we eradicate them. Well, I can answer both.
I think she meant to say cull there, when they cull the pigs.
Ah, there we go.
Oh, I see.
Thank you.
So when we eradicate them, so they are euthanized and disposed of. So it's uninspected meat, and pigs, as we know, can be like loaded with diseases and stuff. We do get a bit of flack because, you know, it's a waste, and it is wasteful for sure to just dispose of the meat. But the program leaders are very cautious of creating a demand for something that we're trying to eradicate. So if they were to provide all of that meat to a food bank or something, and then we are successful and we've eradicated the problem, we don't want there to be a demand for it as well. So there's a few reasons why we do that, but that's how the process is.
Great. Are there any other questions for Megan? I really hope your forage program takes off next year. That's really interesting as well.
Couldn't have picked a worse year, right?
Yeah, I know that's poor timing, but that's okay. Next year's going to be great. So.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Megan.
Thanks, guys.
All right, and now we're going to move on to the last part of our AGM, which is the Golden Shovel Award. And I'm going to pass it off to Randy to present.
Okay, for those of you who are new to the AGM, what we do every year is that we actually have an annual award called the Golden Shovel, which we've been issuing since, I think, 2008. And it goes to a person who has made an outstanding contribution to invasive species management in the East Kootenays. And this year, we're awarding it to Kendall Benish. And she might be a little surprised, and hopefully she is, because her supervisor at Kootenay Conservation Program actually sent her here under false pretenses, because we like keeping this a surprise till the last minute. Now, Gabriella, could you actually, yes, she is. You didn't see this coming? Come on, seriously? Okay. Okay. Oh, actually, Gabrielle, could you hold up the golden shovel?
Yeah.
So she can see what she's about to receive?
Oh wait, it's kind of blurry.
Yeah.
There you go. It's a golden trowel.
It's actually much larger in real life. She's just sitting too close to the camera.
This is not showing up in the camera. There you go.
No, yes. In real life. Yes, in real life, you can actually, dig up the entire yard with it slowly. Okay, and some of you, if you haven't met Kendall, or you just this is the only introduction to EKISC is at these meetings, I better give you some reasons as to why we gave it to Kendall, so you actually understand that maybe we could have given her a bigger shovel. We actually hired Kendall to actually operate as our program director back in 2019, sorry. And as we were interviewing her, one of the questions was, what do you do to keep yourself organized? And she proudly showed us 2 day timers. And you're going, you're impressed by that? Goes, well, you got to understand what the program director does. You got 20 funding sources, $1 million. You've got to split that into wages, herbicide treatment, 4 contracts, 5 ranchers per year spread out over 9 invasive plant management areas, 25 plants you have to kill on site, and there's 127 you may or may not kill depending on where you find them. Just as a rule of thumb, starting off with 2 day timers, that's a good start if you do that voluntarily, because after that you need maybe 3. One of Kendall's first things was that she took over our finances and she kept us out of overdraft for the 2 fiscals she worked for us. And we just assumed we always had a fiscal every year, but Kendall just phoned up the funders and asked if we could actually invoice partway through the contract so we could pay off our contractor and not go into an overdraft. That saves a ton of money. We can use that for staff and operations. She also said, why don't we switch over to a bookkeeper? Being an idiot, I said, why? And she says, well, a bookkeeper is 1/3 the cost of an accountant. We need the accountant for the end of year report, but not necessarily the day-to-day savings. So I had one of my Homer Simpson moments where I went, oh, really? We didn't do that? And then using all these savings, we're actually able to hire Gabriella as an administrative assistant to actually aid in the fundraising, the reports, and the accounting that we're doing, which is why Gabriella's with us now. And Kendall also clearly focused us on the core business of EKISC, and this led us into more inventory and management contracts, not necessarily the herbicide spraying contracts. Kendall last season also dealt with an environmental infraction issue that was immensely stressful. And I also have to say that she was doing excellent communications. Like, I knew what was being invoiced every week, and I knew what all the staff were doing. Which is, kind of, sort of like Santa's workshop. I wonder what the elves are doing in their off days. And I got to say that all of us, including the staff, were very sorry to see her go. And that's why they actually made me do the talk, because obviously I have no soul, whereas the rest of them are getting kind of a little weepy. But Kendall, we greatly appreciated your time with us, and and we are truly sorry to see you go. And you can actually do a rebuttal now if you wish. You can unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Randy. I have to say I'm completely taken aback, and I can't believe that I'm gracing the Golden Shovel Award realm with all of the other unbelievable legends that are on that list. So I'm greatly humbled by this. I think I mean, any success that EKISC has, or really invasive species management in the region, is a huge collaboration between the amazing staff at EKISC, the dedicated board. Randy, I think, has probably donated more board time than any other person I've worked with on a volunteer board. So that's incredible. All of the project partners, the other regional groups, the contractors, and the folks from the province that support EKISC. I fondly think back to the very first few days and weeks and months that I worked with EKISC, and how much I didn't know about the East Kootenay region and how much I didn't know about invasive species management, and the generosity and time of all of the staff members and folks that I worked with that patiently helped me learn and grow along the way was really appreciated. And yeah, definitely led us to circumstances where we could work together and accomplish some cool things over those years. So I'll just leave it with, I miss all of you, and I fondly think back how amazing it was working with everybody. And yeah, it's just great to see you all here. And I'm just excited to see where EKISC goes in the next few years. And I wish you all very well. I'm also, I'm just totally blown away and humbled. And thank you also for making the Golden Shovel. I know that's a task in its own as well. So man, it's beautiful. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Kendall. Yeah, very well deserved. As you can see in the comments, there's no better recipient for the 2020 Golden Shovel Award. So thanks for coming on and receiving the award. And also, I forgot to say thanks for our speedy session participants for coming in today and doing a presentation for us. And that wraps up our AGM. I want to thank everybody for participating. I especially want to thank the EKISC team, Emma, Gabriella, Danny, for putting this together. Thank you, everyone. Until next year, hopefully, maybe we'll be in person. Let's cross our fingers and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.